Greetings everyone, this is Omni-Wizard. Prepare yourselves for what if Harry Potter was the last son of Krypton and Hogwarts couldn't contain him. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Let's begin. Chapter 1 The Boy in the Pod. The morning Harry Potter turned 11, he woke up before the sun did. He lay still in his cupboard under the stairs, listening to the house breathe around him. Uncle Vernon's snoring came through the ceiling like a diesel engine with a grudge. The pipes knocked. A fox crossed the garden, and its claws made tiny ticking sounds on the path. Harry heard all of it with perfect, unhurried clarity, the way he heard everything, which was to say, the way no one else on Privet Drive heard anything at all. He sat up slowly, his head missing the slanted ceiling by the exact 2 inches it always did, and folded his arms across his knees. The cupboard smelled like old wood and shoe polish and the faint chemical ghost of the bleach Aunt Petunia used on the hallway tiles. Harry knew the smell of every room in this house the way a cartographer knows maps, not because he loved the territory, but because he'd had 11 years to memorize it. 11 years. He turned the number over in his mind like a coin. Something felt different today. Not bad different, not the prickly wrong-sized feeling he got when he'd accidentally melted one of Vernon's golf trophies by looking at it too long. This was quieter. Like a frequency just below hearing that he'd been waiting his whole life to resolve into something he could finally understand. He pulled on his clothes in the dark, Dudley's old ones, 3 sizes too large, which Harry had stopped caring about approximately 3 years ago, and unlatched the cupboard door without a sound. The kitchen was gray and pre-dawn quiet. Harry filled the kettle, set it on the hob, and stood at the window while the water heated. Outside, the perfectly identical houses of Privet Drive stood shoulder to shoulder in the lightning dark, every hedge trimmed to the same height, every car a sensible color, every garden a statement of devoted, aggressive normalcy. Harry watched a pigeon land on the Dursleys' garden wall. He watched it with the easy, total attention that made the neighbors uneasy without them being able to explain why. There was something in the way Harry Potter looked at things, like he was seeing further than the surface of them, which was, in point of fact, exactly what he was doing. He could see the pigeon's heartbeat. A small, fierce, rapid flutter behind its breastbone, warm and real. He made the tea, left a cup on the counter for Petunia because it cost him nothing, and went back to his cupboard. The crystal was the size of his thumbnail. He kept it in a tin that had once held throat lozenges, tucked inside the hollow space behind the loose skirting board at the back of the cupboard. He'd found it when he was 4, not in the cupboard, but in his earliest real memory, which wasn't really a memory at all but something closer to a recording. There had been a pod, not a dream. He knew the difference between dreams and this, because dreams went fuzzy at the edges and made emotional sense even when they made no logical sense. And this was the opposite. This was crystalline and specific and cool. A vessel, smooth, organic, white as bone, lying in a field somewhere in the West Country, half buried in a furrow of scorched earth. And inside the vessel himself, not a baby exactly, something older in a baby's body, something that had crossed an unimaginable distance and arrived, gasping and screaming, into yellow sunlight. The crystal had been in the pod with him. He didn't know how he knew this, but he did. He held it in his palm now, in the thin pre-dawn light coming through the slat in the cupboard door, and waited for what he'd been waiting for all morning without knowing he was waiting for it. The crystal pulsed once, like a heartbeat. Harry went very still, it pulsed again. And then a voice, quiet, precise, speaking in a language Harry had never been taught but understood the way he understood gravity and sunlight, said simply, "Kal-El." Harry didn't move for a long moment. "I'm here," he said. The voice was his father's. He knew this not because he recognized it, he'd never heard it before, but because the crystal made it impossible not to know. It came with context baked in, like warmth from a fire, like the name attached to a face you love before you can explain why you love it. Jor-El had recorded this message before the end of everything. It didn't come all at once. It came the way a long letter reads when you're absorbing each line before moving to the next, measured, deliberate, built to last the distance. "You are Kal-El, son of Jor-El and Lara, last child of Krypton. The world that made you is gone. I cannot change this. I could not stop it, though I tried. What I could do, what I did, was send you forward. You will not remember your first years on Krypton. You were too young. But you carry everything. It was inside you, in your cells, in the crystalline structure of your Kryptonian biology, in the capacity of your mind. Krypton's knowledge is not lost. It lives in you." Harry sat with that. Outside the cupboard, the house began to wake up. He heard Dudley's feet hit the floor above him, a sound like a small earthquake, and Uncle Vernon's alarm shriek, and then be silenced with a thump that suggested Vernon had punched it into submission. Harry didn't move. The crystal pulsed softly in his hand. "Your body was designed by a dead civilization's finest science. Under a yellow star, a star younger and less complex than Krypton's red sun, you will be more than you were ever meant to be. I designed you for survival, Kal-El." I did not know how much more than that you would become. I am sorry I cannot be there to see it. There was a pause in the recording, just a breath of static, and then quieter. Your mother sends her love. We both do more than this small device can carry. The crystal went dark, just glass again or whatever it was. Harry closed his fingers around it. He sat there in his cupboard in his enormous ugly hand-me-down clothes in the house of people who had never loved him on the morning of his 11th birthday, and he felt something he hadn't expected to feel. Not grief, not yet, clarity. The letters started arriving that afternoon. The first one came with the post, which Dudley intercepted because he always did. Dudley sorted the post every morning with the territorial enthusiasm of a customs official, making a pile for himself and a pile for his parents, and leaving anything else on the doormat. He didn't notice the letter addressed to Harry until he'd already put it face down in the wrong pile, and by the time he did notice, by the time he turned it over and saw the name and the address, and below the address the words "cupboard under the stairs," his face did something complicated. "Dad," Dudley said. Vernon was eating his bacon and reading the financial pages, and radiating the specific contentment of a man who believed the universe was correctly organized. "Dad," Dudley said again, holding out the letter. Vernon looked up, looked at the letter. The color left his face so quickly it was almost impressive, like watching a tap turned off. Harry was washing the breakfast dishes. He kept washing them. He'd already seen the letter with his peripheral vision well before Dudley picked it up. "Boy," Vernon said in the tight, compressed voice he used when he was trying to contain something very large in a very small vessel. "Come here." Harry dried his hands. Turned around, Vernon was holding the letter the way you'd hold something you suspected was alive. "This," Vernon said, "is addressed to you." "I know," Harry said. Vernon blinked. He'd expected a reaction, curiosity, excitement, the biddable confusion he was used to from Harry, which wasn't actually confusion at all but Harry making life simpler for everyone by performing it. He hadn't expected that tone. "That simple even, I know." "You're not getting it," Vernon said. "Whatever this is, whoever these people are, you're not, Mr. Dursley," Harry said, and something in his voice made everyone in the kitchen go quiet. "I'm going to read that letter." It wasn't a threat. It was quieter than a threat. It was a fact delivered in the tone of someone who has never needed to raise their voice because they have never had anything to prove. Vernon held onto the letter for 3 more seconds. Then he put it on the table. Harry picked it up, opened it, and read. They burned the letters that night in the garden incinerator. 11 of them because 11 had arrived, 1 through the post and 10 more that had come through what Vernon described with increasing hysteria as impossible means. 1 had come through the bathroom ventilator. 3 through the letter box in a burst that lasted approximately 40 seconds. 2 had simply appeared on the kitchen table, which caused Aunt Petunia to make a noise Harry had never heard her make before and never wanted to hear again. Harry watched the fire consume the parchment. He'd already memorized every word. He could still see the burning letters in his mind, could replay them perfectly, one of those Kryptonian mental capacities Jor-El had mentioned, a kind of eidetic total recall that he'd always assumed was simply how everyone's brain worked until he was old enough to realize it wasn't. He'd already decided. Before the first letter burned. Before Vernon nailed the letterbox shut. Before the family retreated inside and the doors were locked, and the television turned up loud to cover the specific silence that falls over a house where someone is trying very hard not to think about something. He was going to Hogwarts. They went to the hut on the rock to escape the letters, which struck Harry as a magnificent waste of time. But he went along with it because the Dursleys needed to believe they were doing something, and because the hut was, in its bleakly barren way, more interesting than Privet Drive. It sat on a needle of gray rock in a gray sea under a gray sky, battered by a wind that smelled of salt and cold iron, and Harry sat on the floor of it with his back against the wall and listened to the sea and thought about Krypton. He thought about a civilization. Billions of people, Jor-El's message had said without saying it. He'd conveyed it in that embedded contextual way, a weight of knowledge that didn't come in sentences. Billions of people who built towers of crystal and mapped the stars and reached across space with their understanding. And then they were gone, and the only thing left of all of them was a chip of crystal in a tin that had once held throat lozenges, and a boy sitting on a rock in the North Sea. He was not going to cry about it. He was not going to pretend it wasn't devastating. Both things could be true. Dudley was snoring, Vernon was snoring. Petunia had put her coat over herself like a blanket and gone rigid in the way she slept, always slightly martyred, even unconscious. Harry watched the clock on the crumbling wall. His birthday had been yesterday. He was 11 now. He thought about what that meant, not in the abstract, but specifically in terms of what he knew and what he could do and what was coming next. He was thinking about all of this when the door came off its hinges. Not dramatically, not explosively. It simply stopped being attached to the frame and fell inward in one flat piece. and filling the door-shaped space behind it was the largest human being Harry had ever seen. The giant had a wild dark beard and a coat that appeared to be made from the hide of something enormous and eyes the color of beetles. And he was holding a pink umbrella and soaking wet from the sea crossing, and he looked around the hut with an expression of cheerful purpose that suggested the inelegance of his entrance had not occurred to him as a problem. "Couldn't make it out from that boat," the giant said, addressing the room which was now fully awake and variously terrified. "Rickety thing, Hagrid. Rubeus Hagrid, keeper o' keys at Hogwarts." He found Harry and his face did something warm and sad and relieved all at once. "And you," he said, "must be Harry Potter." "I am," Harry said. He was already standing. He'd stood up when the door fell, not in alarm but in the simple physical courtesy of greeting someone properly. He looked up at Hagrid, quite a long way up, and Hagrid looked down at him and they studied each other for a moment. "Blimey," Hagrid said quietly, "you've got her eyes." Harry had been told this before by teachers who'd known the Potters and felt the need to say so as if it was something he needed to know about himself. But Hagrid said it the way you'd say something you meant, without agenda, and Harry found that he didn't mind. "You're here about Hogwarts," Harry said. Hagrid blinked. "Well, yeah, how'd you?" "The letters?" Harry glanced at Vernon, who had gone the color of raw dough. 11 of them. Hagrid turned to Vernon with an expression that shifted quite pleasantly from warm to something considerably less so. "Did you not give him his letters?" "I burned them," Vernon said, and then seemed to realize this was perhaps not the optimal information to volunteer, but it was too late. Hagrid said nothing for a moment. He reached into his coat and produced a crumpled envelope. "No matter," he said, handing it to Harry, who took it. "I've got one here." Harry opened it. "Read it." "I'll need supplies," he said. "That's what I'm here for," Hagrid said, brightening. "Got a list and everything." "Oh," he produced something wrapped in newspaper from a pocket. "And I brought ya a birthday cake. Bit squashed, sorry, the boat." Harry looked at the squashed pink cake, icing cracked and candles bent sideways. He looked at Hagrid, who was watching him with that complicated expression, warmth and grief and enormous care all mixed together. "Thank you," Harry said, and he meant it with a sincerity that made Hagrid's beard wobble. Behind them, Vernon Dursley was building up to something. "Now see here," he started, and Harry glanced at him with a look of such absolute, unapologetic calm that Vernon's sentence lost its skeleton somewhere in the middle and folded. "I'll be going with Hagrid," Harry told him very pleasantly. "Thank you for the roof." Diagon Alley was extraordinary, not because of the magic or not only that. It was extraordinary the way a living thing is extraordinary. The way a tide is extraordinary. The way anything that has been accumulating its own energy for centuries and has no intention of apologizing for it is extraordinary. It pulsed and roared and spilled around corners and smelled of parchment and spices and strange animals, and Harry walked through it with his hands in his pockets and his eyes taking everything in with that wide, quiet, total attention. He heard conversations 12 stalls away. He saw a pickpocket working the crowd near the apothecary and watched until the man caught Harry's eye across 40 feet of crowd and put the wallet back. He read the titles of every book in Flourish and Blot's window display from the far side of the street. "You all right?" Hagrid asked, watching him. "I'm fine," Harry said, "just looking. Most kids your age can't stop talking when they see it for the first time." "I'm looking," Harry said again and smiled when Hagrid laughed. Gringotts was the first genuinely interesting thing, not the building, though the building was impressive, all white stone columns and goblin tellers behind long counters, and the smell of gold that was not quite a smell but a pressure, something mineral and ancient in the air. What was interesting was the vault. The goblin took them down in a rattling cart that descended at angles that should have been illegal, and Harry felt the acceleration in his teeth and enjoyed it. When the vault opened, and Harry saw the glittering towers of gold coins for the first time, he stood in front of it and thought about what money meant to people who had grown up without any. He thought about Dudley's 4 bedrooms and his own cupboard. Then he filled the bag Hagrid held out and moved on. The wand shop was last. Ollivander's, small and narrow and smelling of wood shavings, every surface crowded with long boxes stacked in towers that defied easy explanation. Mr. Ollivander himself was silver-eyed and moved like a man who was accustomed to the space around him rearranging itself, which Harry supposed was exactly what happened when you worked with wands for long enough. "Harry Potter," Ollivander said, like he'd been expecting the appointment. "Mr. Ollivander," Harry replied. The fitting took longer than it might have. Not because Harry was difficult, he wasn't, but because something unusual was happening with each wand he tried. Not the usual sparks or wind or light. When Harry picked up the first wand and gave it a wave, a fern in the window turned briefly to crystal and then back again. The second one caused all the boxes within 6 feet to briefly levitate. The third one, a 10-inch cherry, made a sound like a bell and went warm in Harry's hand, and Ollivander took a sharp breath. That's not your wand, Ollivander said and took it back carefully, and his silver eyes were doing something that might have been calculation or might have been awe. Curious, very curious. He disappeared into the stacks. He was gone for 2 minutes. When he came back, he was holding a box that he carried slightly differently from the others, more carefully, or perhaps more carefully than carefully, with the reverence people reserve for things they don't fully understand. Holly and Phoenix Feather, Ollivander said, setting the box on the counter. 11 inches, supple. Harry picked up the wand. The warmth came immediately, not the tentative, questioning warmth of the cherry wood, but something certain and expansive, like sunlight after a long cloud, like a key turning in a lock that has been waiting years to be opened. Gold sparks burst from the tip and hit the ceiling and burst again into smaller sparks, and the fern in the window went gold-tipped and the boxes stopped rattling and everything in the shop settled, like a held breath released. Curious, Ollivander said again, very softly. His eyes hadn't left Harry's face. What's curious? Harry asked. He was watching the last sparks fade. The wand that gave you your scar at 2 was Phoenix Feather. Same Phoenix, in fact, curious that it should choose your hand. He paused. Though I wonder sometimes if wands choose for reasons we only partly understand. Everything chooses for reasons we only partly understand, Harry said, pocketing the wand, and Ollivander made a sound that was perhaps an agreement. The Hogwarts Express left King's Cross at 11 o'clock on the 1st of September. Harry found platform 9 3/4 without difficulty. He'd simply stood at the barrier for 30 seconds, listening to the specific resonance of something on the other side of it that was not quite sound, and then walked through. He settled in a compartment, stowed his trunk, and sat beside the window with Hedwig's cage on the seat next to him. Hedwig was a snowy owl, white as bone, with golden eyes. She had looked at Harry when he bought her from the magical menagerie with an expression of thorough assessment, and then consented to be purchased. They understood each other perfectly. The boy who knocked on the compartment door had red hair and a smear of something on his nose and the look of someone who had been embarrassed recently and was trying not to show it. Everywhere else is full, he said. Can I sit down? Harry said. I'm Harry. Ron, the boy said, sitting with the boneless relief of someone who has been standing for a long time. Ron Weasley, are those real chocolate frogs? Harry looked at the pile of sweets he'd bought from the trolley. I assume so. You've got to flip them quick or they jump out the window, Ron said, with the confidence of hard-won expertise. I lost 4 last year. My brother Fred said that's the cost of doing business. Harry handed him a frog. Ron caught it with a reflex that spoke to a lifetime of practice. They ate in companionable quiet for a moment. You're Harry Potter, Ron said, looking at his forehead with the directness of someone young enough not to have learned to pretend they weren't looking. Last I checked, Harry said. Ron nodded, absorbed this. My mum thinks you're brilliant, he offered. Like the whole family really, but mostly Mum. What do you think? Harry asked. Ron considered this with admirable seriousness. Dunno yet, he said. You seem all right. High praise, Harry said. It's an opening offer, Ron said and grinned, and Harry grinned back, and that was that. The girl arrived mid-journey, opening the door without knocking with the manner of someone for whom all doors were fundamentally open. Has anyone seen a toad? A boy named Neville has lost one. She scanned the compartment with quick brown eyes that lingered on Harry for half a second before moving on. No toad, are you two doing magic? I've tried a few simple spells. She held up her wand. They all worked on the first attempt. My name's Hermione Granger, by the way. Ron Weasley, Ron said. And no, we haven't got a toad. She looked at Harry. You're Harry Potter. I've been told, Harry said. I read about you in A History of Magic and the rise and fall of the dark arts and great wizarding events of the 20th century. What did they say? That you survived the killing curse and no one knows why. She said it with the tone of someone who found unsolved problems personally offensive. The current theory is your mother's sacrifice created some form of ancient protective magic. That theory is correct, Harry said. Hermione stopped. You know, I know that part, he said. Sit down. Ron, move your rat. Ron moved his rat. Hermione sat down. She looked at Harry with an expression he would come to know well, equal parts fascination and the slight irritation of someone who suspects they've met a problem larger than their current framework can handle. How do you know? She asked. Some things, Harry said. I simply know. Hermione opened her mouth, closed it, made a note in a small book she produced from somewhere. Hogwarts appeared first as a feeling. Harry felt it before he saw it. Standing in one of the boats with Ron and Hermione and a round-faced, toad-adjacent boy named Neville who had recovered his toad after all. A deep resonance. Like the subterranean hum of something that had been awake and accumulating itself for a very long time. He looked up from the black water of the lake and there it was, blazing with light on its hill, towers and turrets against a sky thick with stars. It was, genuinely, one of the most impressive things he'd ever seen. He didn't say this. He looked at it with the same clear, absorbing attention he gave everything and felt it looking back. The enchanted ceiling of the Great Hall was a perfect reproduction of the night sky outside, and Harry tilted his head back and found Orion, found Ursa Major, found the constellation he always looked for and never spoke about, the red point of light barely visible that was Sol, Krypton's sun, seen from the wrong direction across an unthinkable distance. "You okay?" Ron murmured beside him. "Fine," Harry said and straightened up. The Sorting Hat sang its verse, which Harry listened to with genuine interest, and which concluded with a sequence of rhymes about Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin that he thought were rather good for a hat. Names were called. Students went up, sat on the stool, wore the hat, were sorted. The tables erupted in applause for their own. "Potter, Harry." The whispers started the moment Professor McGonagall said his name. He could hear them, every single one of them, from every table, dozens of conversations at once, all processing the same information. "It's him, that's Harry Potter. Is that him? It must be him. He's small. He's not what I expected. Look at his scar." Harry walked to the stool, sat down, and the hat was placed on his head. He heard a voice, not in his ears but somewhere behind them, dry and amused and ancient. "Well," said the Sorting Hat, "this is different." "I'd imagine," Harry replied, which was not precisely talking out loud but close enough. "Kryptonian solar cells in a magical framework. Phoenix wand bonded to a Kryptonian nervous system. Your mother's protective magic fused with— I'm not even entirely sure what I'm reading, boy. This is unprecedented." "Does the hat have to be so surprised?" Harry asked. "You've been sorting students for 1,000 years." "I have never," the hat said with dignity, "sorted anything like you. Now, let's discuss where to put you." "Let's," Harry said. The hat was quiet for a moment. Harry was aware of the entire Great Hall watching him, some students craning their necks. "Cunning is there," the hat said, "the ambition. The Kryptonian mind doesn't process a problem without already running 17 outcomes. That's Slytherin by my understanding of it." "Go on," Harry said. "But the reason you run those outcomes, the reason you care about outcomes, is entirely different from a Slytherin's reason. You are not ambitious for yourself. You don't need anything from this world, not status, not power, not safety. You're already safe, you're already powerful." The hat paused. "You're here because you want to understand, because something in you needs to know what this place is and what you are in it. That is Ravenclaw, except you will never stop to read when someone needs help. You will never choose understanding over action when action is needed. You'll throw yourself at a problem the way your mother threw herself at a curse. That is Gryffindor." "Then put me there," Harry said. "You're not asking me to consider anything else." Why not?" Harry thought about the red-haired boy who'd shared his sweets and told him his mum thought he was brilliant. He thought about the girl who was cataloging his impossibilities in a notebook. He thought about what it meant to have people nearby who didn't need him to be anything other than what he was, and about how rare that was going to be. "Because those are my people," he said simply. The hat was quiet for one more moment. "Gryffindor," the Gryffindor table erupted. Harry took off the hat, set it back on the stool, and walked to his new table. He sat down next to Ron, who was already piling food onto his plate with the thoroughness of someone with older brothers who had taught him that the food doesn't last. "Good," Ron said by way of welcome. "I was worried you'd end up in Ravenclaw." The hat considered it. Harry said, "What? Really, can you actually talk to it?" "If you want to," Harry said. He looked down at his plate. The food had appeared, whole roasted chickens and mountains of roast potatoes and tureens of soup, and a dozen kinds of bread and pies and sauces. And the warm smell of it rose around the table in a fog of cheerful plenty. He piled his plate and ate and listened to the hall, and somewhere above the enchanted ceiling the stars continued doing what stars do, which is burning, patient, and immense, at distances that make human concerns feel simultaneously small and extraordinarily precious. He heard Dumbledore stand, felt the shift of attention in the room the way you feel a change in air pressure, and looked up at the old man at the top table. Silver beard, half-moon spectacles, robes of deep blue embroidered with what appeared to be small golden comets. He was smiling at the assembled students with an expression of genuine warmth that had underneath it the structure of something much more complex. Dumbledore's gaze moved across the Gryffindor table with the unhurried survey of a man reading a document he knows by heart, and then it stopped. On Harry, just for a moment. 2 seconds, maybe 3. Long enough for Harry to meet it directly, steadily, without looking away. Something moved in Dumbledore's expression, something careful and calculated that he almost managed to conceal. He already knows something, Harry thought. He knows more than he said, and he's trying to figure out how much I know. Dumbledore looked away first. He began his welcome speech, and Harry returned to his food, and Ron leaned over to point out that the treacle tart was exceptional if you got to it before the twins, and Hermione across the table was already interrogating a fifth-year about the curriculum. Harry ate his treacle tart. He listened to his new house and his new world with his total, calm, extraordinary attention, and he felt the ancient stones of Hogwarts around him the way he'd felt the resonance from the boat, Not like a building, but like a living thing, massive and layered and watching. He thought, all right then. Let's see what you are. The castle in its way seemed to think the same thing about him. Later, much later, when the feast was done and the students were filing toward the dormitories and the candles were guttering and the portraits were settling into sleep, a small thing happened that no one but Harry noticed. He was walking with Ron and Neville and a girl named Lavender who was telling a story about her grandmother's weather-predicting cat, and they were climbing the first of the staircases. And a step gave way beneath him the way they apparently sometimes did. A trick step, Ron said. Everyone knew about the trick step, and Ron lurched and grabbed for the banister, and Harry caught him by the back of his robes with a hand that wasn't quite moving at human speed. Ron righted himself. Looked at Harry. Looked at his robes. Thanks, he said. That step gets me every year. You're quick. Little bit, Harry said. Ron accepted this. Lavender hadn't noticed. They walked on. Above them, the castle spread its towers against the September sky, and deep in a turret that wasn't on any official map, behind a door that required a password and a staircase that moved only when it wanted to, an old man with a silver beard sat at a desk covered in instruments, several of which were spinning in directions they had not spun in before. He sat looking at them for a long time. Then he picked up a quill and began writing a letter, and his expression in the candlelight was the expression of a chess master who has just realized that the game he thought he was playing may, in fact, be a different game entirely. Chapter 2, What the Castle Feels. The thing about Hogwarts was that it had opinions. Harry figured this out on his third day, when a staircase rotated mid-step and deposited him not outside the charms corridor as it had the day before, but in front of a window overlooking the Quidditch pitch at a particular angle that made the morning light come through the glass in a long, warm bar that pressed against his face like a hand. He stood there for a moment, and he could have sworn the castle was watching him enjoy it. Did the stairs move on you? Ron appeared at the bottom of the staircase he'd just come up, panting. They do that. Mostly to first years, but honestly they do it to anyone. Fred once ended up in the owlery for 3 days. That's not possible, Harry said. Fred's very dedicated, Ron said. The window's light shifted slightly. Harry glanced at it again, then moved on. He was thinking about what the castle felt like, not metaphorically. It had a resonance, that subaudible frequency he'd noticed from the boat on the first night, and in the days since arriving he'd started to map it. It changed with location, the way a piece of music changes with instrumentation. The library was dense with it. The dungeons were cold and layered. The astronomy tower buzzed at a pitch that made his back teeth ache pleasantly. His dormitory was warm and uncomplicated and smelled of the particular magic of proximity, the accumulated presence of people sleeping in the same space night after night, trusting the walls to hold. He liked the dormitory best in the mornings, when Dean was still asleep and Seamus was talking to himself, and Neville was gently panicking about something, and Ron was consuming the remains of whatever he'd smuggled up from the feast. It felt very specifically like something Harry didn't have a clean word for. He supposed the closest word was home, but he'd never had enough of that to be sure of its shape. Defense Against the Dark Arts was second on Tuesday's schedule, and it was the first class Harry walked into already knowing what was wrong. Professor Quirrell met them at the door, turban slightly askew, smile slightly too present for the size of his face. He had the kind of nervous energy that some people broadcast deliberately as a social lubricant, a performance of anxiousness designed to make others feel they should be reassuring him rather than examining him, and Harry noticed it the way you notice a wrong note in a piece of music you know very well. He sat at a desk near the middle, Ron on his left, Hermione on his right with a fresh roll of parchment already unrolled. Good morning, Quirrell said, shuffling papers at the front. Today we'll be beginning with the T-theory of dark creatures, the Grindylow, very dangerous in W water. Hermione's quill began moving immediately. Ron pulled a face that suggested he'd been hoping for something more dramatic. Harry looked at the back of Quirrell's head. He didn't push, he never deliberately pushed his senses past what was comfortable for the room, but something from the man's direction was wrong in a way that was not about nervousness or performance. It was colder than that, like a shadow behind a shadow. He filed it away. He was good at filing things and retrieving them when they became relevant. The class itself was, to be honest, disappointing. Quirrell's stutter seemed to get worse whenever he reached anything genuinely interesting, which had the effect of smoothing every sharp edge off the subject matter until it was as threatening as a library pamphlet. Ron was drawing something in the margin of his notes that appeared to be a Grindylow fighting a Kneazle. Hermione's notes were already twice as long as the material warranted. Harry spent the second half of the class thinking about his wand. He'd been practicing at night, after the others went to sleep, sitting on his bed with the curtains drawn. The wand responded to him the way things always responded to him, with immediacy and excess, as if whatever he asked for it simply did more enthusiastically than strictly required. Lumos produced not a small light at the tip, but a warm glow that filled the entire drawn curtain with soft gold. Wingardium Leviosa, attempted on his trainers, had required him to take a very firm mental step back because his first instinct had lifted them both off the floor along with approximately 3 other items in a 2-foot radius. Magic, he was beginning to understand, was not something he did with his wand. His wand was the direction. The power was his. This was interesting. He hadn't told anyone yet. Charms was different. Professor Flitwick was a small man with an enormous love of his subject and the teaching instinct of someone who genuinely believed every student was one good explanation away from understanding anything. He stood on a pile of books to see over his desk and bounced slightly on his heels when discussing something he found particularly elegant, which was most of it. The levitation charm, Flitwick announced on their 3rd lesson, is one of the first true tests of wand discipline. The incantation is Wingardium Leviosa, Wingardium Leviosa. The movement is a swish and a flick. First years who can perform a clean levitation by the end of October are statistically more likely to achieve an outstanding in their owls. He beamed. So partners please and let's begin. Ron and Hermione were paired by proximity, which immediately became a problem when Hermione corrected his pronunciation twice in 30 seconds. Harry was paired with Neville, who was holding his wand like it had offended him. All right, Neville, Harry said. The wand doesn't like me, Neville said with the resigned certainty of someone who has evidence. Show me your grip, Harry said. Neville held up his hand. Harry looked at the wand and shifted Neville's fingers without ceremony, moved his thumb a half-inch left, straightened his elbow, tilted the angle of his wrist. Try now, Harry said. Neville tried. The feather on the desk in front of them trembled, twitched, and lifted 2 inches before settling back down. Neville made a sound like someone who has just been told wonderful news in a foreign language. Again, Harry said. The feather lifted 6 inches. I did it, Neville said. I actually did it. You did, Harry said, watching Neville's face do something uncomplicated and delighted, and feeling a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with solar energy. Behind him he heard Hermione's clear voice. Wingardium Leviosa. Her feather rocketed upward and hit the ceiling. Flitwick squeaked with delight. Well done, Miss Granger. Ron's feather was smoking at one end, which was not supposed to happen with a levitation charm, and suggested he'd gotten something interestingly wrong. Harry turned back to Neville. 6 more times, he said, and it'll be instinct. By the 3rd week of term, Draco Malfoy had made several attempts to establish himself in Harry's immediate social landscape, and all of them had failed, which was visibly confusing him. The first attempt had been on the train, which Harry had not been present for in the way Malfoy wanted. He'd been paying attention to other things, and Malfoy's posturing had simply not collected the reaction it was seeking. The second attempt had been in the entrance hall, where Malfoy had made a comment about Weasleys that Harry had listened to with the expression of someone receiving a weather report for a country they had no plans to visit. The third had been in the corridor outside Transfiguration, where Malfoy had appeared with Crabbe and Goyle flanking him and said, with practiced lightness, "Potter, still haven't learned to pick better friends, I see." Harry stopped walking. Ron stopped beside him. Hermione, a step ahead, turned around. "Malfoy," Harry said with the same pleasantness he used for most things. "What do you actually want?" Malfoy blinked. This was not the script. "I'm just saying, you've said 3 variations of the same thing in 3 weeks," Harry said. "You want me to care about who I'm standing next to?" "I don't." He paused. "Is there something else?" Malfoy's jaw tightened. Behind him, Crabbe and Goyle exchanged a look that suggested they were processing at a slight delay. "You'll figure out eventually," Malfoy said, and his voice had gone cooler, sharper, the performance dropping out of it, "that in this world blood matters. Where you come from matters." Harry looked at him. Not through him, not past him, but actually at him, the way Harry looked at everything, with the full and unhurried attention that some people found unsettling and couldn't explain why. He saw a boy who had been told what he was worth since before he could form his own opinion on the matter. He saw the belief sitting in Malfoy like a foundation stone, not cruel for its own sake but convinced genuinely that the universe was structured a certain way and that structure needed defending. "Where I come from," Harry said quietly, "matters more than you could currently imagine. I'll agree with you on that." He walked on. Ron followed, pulling a face at Malfoy's back. Hermione fell into step beside Harry and said nothing for 10 seconds and then said, "What did that mean exactly?" "It meant something," Harry said. "I'll tell you when I know how to explain it." "You're very mysterious," Hermione said in the tone of someone taking a note. "I'm really not," Harry said. "I just don't always have the words yet." She looked at him sideways. The notebook came out. Potions was Snape. This was a universal experience that everyone processed differently. For Hermione, Snape was a disappointment dressed as a challenge. She clearly knew the material inside out, and he clearly intended to ignore this as a policy. For Ron, Snape was simply hostile weather, something to be endured by keeping your head down. For Neville, Snape was a minor catastrophe that happened twice a week. For most of the class, Snape was a man who had decided to be unpleasant at scale and was succeeding without visible effort. For Harry, Snape was immediately and specifically interesting. He'd heard the name, in the letters, in Hagrid's half-told stories about his parents. In the compressed and complicated way Hagrid didn't quite talk about certain things. He'd walked into the dungeons on that first morning with the lights low and the pickled animals in their jars and the cold and the specific atmosphere Snape cultivated the way a gardener cultivates a particular microclimate, and he'd looked at Snape and thought, there is a man carrying something very heavy and very old. Snape looked at Harry and said, Potter, our new celebrity. Professor, Harry said. Snape blinked. Once, almost imperceptibly. He'd expected, Harry supposed, something more, nervousness or eagerness to please, or the reflexive contrition that most students brought to his presence before he'd done anything to earn it. He proceeded with the register and his opening lecture with a precision that Harry genuinely admired, even as the lecture was designed as much to intimidate as to educate. Snape on potion-making was the way Harry imagined Jor-El on physics, a mind for which the subject was not separate from breathing, for which the technicality and the beauty were not in opposition but in concert. Tell me, Potter, Snape said partway through, with the tone of a trap offered in gift wrapping, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? Harry looked up from his notes. A sleeping potion so powerful it's known as the draught of living death, he said. The asphodel is a lily. There's a theory the name references morning. Some believe Dumbledore named it in the recipe instructions as a specific historical reference. The dungeon was very quiet. Where the stone plant can be found, Snape said, each word arriving separately. I was going to ask next. The Himalayan foothills, Harry said. Though the quality considered optimal for potion making comes from a cultivated strain, not wild harvested. Bezoar is a stone from a goat's stomach. It's an antidote to most poisons if administered quickly, though it's ineffective against the poison in a venomous tentacula bite. And monkshood and wolfsbane are the same plant, also called aconite. Snape looked at him with an expression that was working very hard to remain neutral. 5 points to Gryffindor, he said at last, with the grudging deliberateness of a man paying a debt he disputes. Then you've read the textbook. I've read everything on the list, Harry said, and several things that weren't. Snape's eyes narrowed slightly. We'll see how you fare with a cauldron then, rather than a memory. Harry's wit-sharpening potion that day was technically flawless and slightly purple, which was not the standard color. Snape looked at it for a long time. Purple, Snape said. It shouldn't be, Harry agreed. It should be pale amber. Yes. What did you do differently? I'm not certain, Harry said, which was almost true. He had followed the instructions exactly, but there was a possibility that the warmth that radiated from him at a cellular level had altered the timing on the Jobberknoll feather reduction. He was still working out the interactions. I'll adjust the temperature management next time. Snape took the potion, said nothing. Set it aside in a way that suggested he was going to do something with it later in private, when there was no one watching him be curious. The scar had been doing something new since Halloween approached. Not hurting, or not only hurting. It had always ached, that faint and distant throb that he'd lived with so long it had become a kind of background frequency, like the hum of the castle. But in the past week it had started doing something more directional, like a compass needle that had chosen to point at something other than north. He'd felt it most sharply on a Tuesday night, lying in bed while the others slept, and the direction it pointed was down through the floors of the castle, through stone and magic and accumulated centuries, to something underground that was awake and aware and wanting. This, Harry thought, is why Dumbledore brought me here this year. Not because 11 was the starting age. He'd read enough of a history of magic and Hogwarts. A history to know the 11-year tradition was pedagogical, not magical. Children were young adults at 11, capable of focused learning, old enough for responsibility, young enough to shape. But Dumbledore had specifically ensured his invitation reached him, specifically sent Hagrid instead of a letter, specifically wanted him here now. There was something in this school that needed Harry, or something that Harry needed to be near. He thought about this and didn't mention it to Ron or Hermione. He was still gathering information. He could afford to be patient. He was very good at being patient. The Quidditch tryout for the first-year seeker position, which was not supposed to exist because first-years didn't try out for Quidditch. Everyone knew this. It was a rule, came about because of a broomstick and Neville and Draco Malfoy. In the sequence of events, Neville had been the one on the broomstick, hovering 6 feet off the ground in the first flying lesson while Madam Hooch explained grip positioning, and the broom had lurched upward without warning and Neville had screamed. And the broom had lurched sideways and deposited Neville on the grass, and his remembrall had gone spinning from his pocket and rolled across the ground. Then Malfoy had picked it up and gone up on his own broom, grinning, holding it out of reach. Harry had already kicked off before Malfoy finished the sentence that started with "think you can get it back." He'd done it without deciding to do it, which was the first sign. He'd simply kicked off from the ground and gone up, and the broomstick had felt less like a vehicle and more like an extension of a decision. And he'd accelerated toward Malfoy with a directness that made Malfoy rear back on his broom and drop the remembrall, and Harry had caught it, 20 feet up, one-handed, without looking at his hand. The class below made a sound. Madam Hooch had not yet returned from taking Neville to the hospital wing. McGonagall had seen it from the castle window, which was how 2 hours later, Harry was standing in the corridor outside the Transfiguration classroom being looked at very carefully by Professor McGonagall, who had the expression of someone containing multiple reactions simultaneously and organizing them in order of professional priority. "I want to be clear," she said, "that flying on school grounds before lessons are complete is a serious infraction." "Yes," Harry said, "and that this is not me overlooking it." "Understood. I have spoken to Professor Dumbledore and we are in agreement." She paused. The containing of reactions appeared to be ongoing. "You are to report to Oliver Wood this afternoon for Quidditch tryouts. You will be considered for the position of seeker on the Gryffindor team." "First years don't play Quidditch," Harry said. "They don't," McGonagall agreed, as a general principle. She made a small sound that might in an unguarded moment have been called a laugh. "Report to Wood by 4 o'clock. He did. Oliver Wood was 17, captain of the Gryffindor team, and the most specifically focused person Harry had ever met, which was saying something given that Harry had met Hermione. Wood did not ask questions about Harry's flying experience or his prior Quidditch knowledge. He handed him a firebolt. The school's practice brooms were ancient cleansweeps that groaned under aerodynamic stress, but Wood produced a firebolt from a case with the reverence of someone opening a reliquary and pointed at the pitch. "I'm going to release the snitch," Wood said. "Catch it." Harry looked at the pitch, looked at the firebolt in his hands. It was a beautiful broom, responsive, the engineering so fine you could feel the intelligence in it. But Harry was already aware that the broom was not, precisely, the limiting factor in whatever was about to happen. He kicked off. The firebolt responded like a thought. He went up 50 feet in what felt like no time, and the pitch opened beneath him, and the late afternoon light caught the gold of the released snitch as it shot sideways at a speed calibrated to make it genuinely difficult to see. Harry saw it. Obviously. He felt it more than saw it, in the way he felt everything, the particular signature of something small and fast and gold moving through air at approximately 60 meters per second, bearing west-northwest. He tracked it for 4 seconds without moving, mapping its pattern, and then he went. He caught it in 11 seconds from the moment Wood released it. He hovered back to Wood level and held out the snitch, which was fluttering in his closed fist. Wood stared at him. 11 seconds, Wood said. "Approximately," Harry said. "The school record for snitch capture at tryouts," Wood said very carefully, "is 4 minutes and 7 seconds. Harry said. Wood continued staring. Harry could see the man's brain rearranging expectations in real time, which was something he was getting used to. "Welcome to the team," Wood said. November arrived and brought cold with it, and Harry woke one morning to find the first frost on the dormitory window and a new urgency in the directional pull of his scar that had nothing to do with weather. He lay in bed and thought about the underground thing, the presence behind the floors. He thought about Quirrell's shadow behind a shadow. He thought about Dumbledore watching him at the feast with that calculating warmth. He assembled the pieces with the methodical patience of someone who has learned that problems are easier when you stop pretending they're not there. Someone had hidden something in this school. Someone else was trying to get to it. And Dumbledore had placed Harry here this year, Harry specifically, with specific awareness of what Harry was, or at least partial awareness, because Harry wasn't sure Dumbledore knew everything. The castle knew, or something in the castle knew. The resonance changed when he thought about the underground space, went tighter, more urgent, like a held breath. He got up, dressed, and went down to the common room, which was empty at this hour except for the fire and the portraits sleeping in their frames. He sat in the chair nearest the fire and took the crystal from his pocket. He kept it in his jeans now, always close as a heartbeat. In the firelight it looked like something living. "I know," he said quietly, not to the crystal exactly, to the air. To whatever part of his father's legacy lived in him that he couldn't quite locate. "I know there's something here, and I know you didn't send me across space to sit still." The crystal was warm in his palm, just warm, no voice, not this time. Outside, Hogwarts breathed in the frost. Snape attempted legilimency on a Friday. Harry doubted Snape would have called it that. He doubted Snape would have admitted to anything deliberate at all. It would have seemed to any observer like a normal moment in potions, Snape moving between cauldrons, arriving at Harry's station, looking over his shoulder at the boiling liquid with the critical gaze he applied to everything. A pause that ran a beat too long. Harry felt it the moment it began. Not an intrusion exactly, more like a pressure at the edge of his mind, thin and precise, the way a blade is thin and precise. Snape was extraordinarily skilled. The probe was light enough to be mistaken for attention. Harry let it rest there for exactly 2 seconds. Then he turned and looked at Snape directly with complete awareness, and Snape felt the looking back, the recognition, the absolute non-alarm on Harry's face, and withdrew so cleanly and quickly that Harry almost missed the speed of it. Almost. "Is there a problem with my potion, Professor?" Harry asked. Snape looked at the potion. It was, as always, technically without fault and slightly unusual in its color. This one was a swelling solution that had achieved the correct bright blue but with a faint internal luminescence that swelling solutions did not typically have. "No," Snape said, "carry on." He moved to the next station. Harry watched him for a moment, then returned to his work. That evening in the common room, Hermione set down her book and said, without preamble, "I know you noticed." Harry looked up from the map of Hogwarts he'd been memorizing. Noticed what? Whatever Snape was doing in potions. Her eyes were doing the cataloging thing. "You went very still for about 2 seconds and then he moved away faster than I've ever seen him move. What was that?" "He was curious about something," Harry said carefully. "About you? Most people's curiosity stops at my forehead," Harry said. "His goes further." Hermione considered this. "Is that dangerous?" "Not to me," Harry said. She made her note. He watched her make it without comment, and when she looked up he said, "You're writing a lot of notes about things I say." "You say things that don't fit any framework I currently have," she said unapologetically. "I'm building a new one." Harry looked at her, at the parchment covered in her small, precise handwriting, at the way she held the quill like a tool rather than a prop, like someone for whom thinking and writing were the same action. "When you build it," he said, "I'll tell you more." She looked at him. The quill lowered slightly. "Promise?" "Yes," he said. It was the first promise he'd made to anyone in Hogwarts, and he made it without hesitation because he meant it and he only said things he meant. It was a small distinction that was not, in any way he could explain, small. Ron, without looking up from the chess game he was playing against himself, said, "I'm also here, you know." "Your framework doesn't need rebuilding," Harry said. "It's fine as it is." Ron moved a bishop. "Yeah," he said, satisfied. "It is." The night before Halloween, Harry dreamed in Kryptonian. Not the language, he always had access to the language. It lived in him the same way English did, naturalized, but the architecture. The dream had the quality of Jor-El's message that embedded specificity, and what he saw was Krypton, not as it fell, not the disaster. As it was, towers of transparent crystal rising from a blue plateau, a city so large it had its own weather patterns. Light that was red and complex, older than Earth's sun by 2 billion years. He walked through it, and it was beautiful, and it was dead, and he carried both of those facts in the same chest without contradiction. He woke up before dawn. The dormitory was breathing with sleep around him, frost on the window again, the pull of the scar steady and directional, pointing down. He got up, pulled on his cloak, and went to the window. He looked out at the grounds, the lake black in the pre-dawn, the forbidden forest a dark edge at the limit of the firelight that came from Hagrid's hut. He rose off the floor 3 inches. Just 3, enough to be standing on nothing, which was not flying exactly, but was the thing his body did when he was very still, and his mind went quiet, and he stopped asking himself to remain earthbound. 3 inches off a dormitory floor in a castle in Scotland, floating in the dark. He hovered there for a long time, looking at the grounds. Below him, unseen, deep in the earth beneath the school, something stirred and hungered and pulled at the scar with the insistence of a tide. He thought soon, the word wasn't a threat or a promise, it was simply an acknowledgement. A recognition between 2 things that were aware of each other, across stone and magic, and the gap between what had been and what was coming. The castle held him, and the sky outside went from black to gray to the deep, particular blue of early morning. And Harry Potter, last son of Krypton, stood on nothing and watched the world wake up and thought about what came next. Chapter 3, something older than magic. Halloween at Hogwarts smelled like burnt sugar and candle wax, and the particular excitement of a few hundred children who had been promised a feast, and were going to collect on that promise regardless of what the universe had planned. Harry noticed the troll before anyone said a word about it. He was sitting at the Gryffindor table when the smell hit him, not the pumpkins or the roasted chicken or the treacle tart warming on the serving platters. Underneath all of that, threading through the great hall like a cold current in warm water, was something else. Something old and sour and animal, the smell of something large that had not bathed in a very long time and was moving through enclosed stone spaces. He set down his fork. "What's wrong?" Ron said, mouth full of something. "Give me a second," Harry said. He listened. Beneath the noise of the feast, 400 conversations, the clatter of cutlery, the portraits arguing about something seasonal, Peeves 2 floors up doing what Peeves did, he found it. Heavy footsteps, each one a small seismic event, irregular in rhythm, coming from the direction of the dungeons but moving upward. Moving toward the girls' bathrooms on the 2nd floor, where Hermione had gone 20 minutes ago after Ron had said something tactless about her knowing things from books rather than experience. And she had left the table with her jaw set in a way that made Harry want to say something to Ron, but he decided she needed the space more than the intervention. He was already standing. "Harry," Ron said. "Troll in the building," Harry said, the way you'd say it's raining, factual, useful, requiring immediate action. "Come on." He was moving before Ron had fully processed the sentence. He heard Ron shove back from the table and follow, which was what Ron did, which was one of the things Harry valued most about him. Behind them, a door banged open and Professor Quirrell sprinted into the Great Hall shouting about a troll in the dungeons and promptly fainted, which was, Harry thought as he took the stairs 3 at a time, a remarkable piece of theater. The timing was too good. The location in the announcement dungeons was specifically wrong, in a way that suggested either incompetence or misdirection, and Harry had already ruled out incompetence. The screaming from the Great Hall began. McGonagall's voice cut through it like a blade. Harry was already on the 2nd floor. The troll was 12 feet tall, gray-green, and currently occupying the corridor outside the girls' bathroom with the thoughtless destructiveness of something that had no particular agenda beyond existing in a space too small for it. It swung its club, a length of tree trunk that still had roots attached, into the wall, and the stones cracked and dust rained down and the torches in their brackets guttered. Harry stopped in the corridor 10 feet back and looked at it. It hadn't seen him yet. It was facing the bathroom door, which it had reduced to splinters, and from inside came Hermione's voice, not screaming, which was interesting, but making the particular controlled sounds of someone working very hard not to scream, which was somehow worse. Harry looked at the troll with the total, clear attention he gave everything. It was frightening in the way that anything massive and violent and essentially mindless is frightening. The fear wasn't for himself. It was the abstract recognition of danger the way you recognize a storm. The troll smelled of rot and something mineral, like wet rock, and it breathed in long, ragged bellows that shook the air. Ron arrived behind him, skidded on the stone floor, grabbed the doorframe. "Blimey," Ron said. "Stay back," Harry said. "Harry, you can't." Harry was already walking toward it, not running, walking, hands at his sides, with the unhurried directness of someone who has assessed a situation and made a decision and is implementing it. The troll swung its club again and another section of wall came apart and the debris fell across the corridor and Harry stepped over it without breaking stride. The troll turned. Its tiny eyes found Harry. It registered him the way it registered most things, as an obstacle, a source of potential noise, something to remove. It swung. Harry caught the club. Not with both hands, with his right hand, one-handed, the way you'd catch a ball someone has lobbed at you from 3 feet away. The impact sent a shockwave up his arm that he felt the way you feel a loud noise, present but not painful, and the troll froze. The club stopped moving. The troll pulled and the club did not move, and the troll pulled harder, and Harry was standing on the stone floor with his feet planted and his arm extended, and the club was not moving. The troll made a sound. Low, confused, the sound of something that has never encountered an obstacle it couldn't remove. Harry took 1 step forward and pulled. The club came free in his hand, and the troll lurched off balance, and Harry put the club down on the stones behind him with a careful, deliberate clang, and the troll roared. A sound that hit the walls and came back doubled, a sound that should have been terrifying, and lunged. Harry sidestepped. Clean and precise, 6 inches to the left, and the troll's massive fist hit the corridor wall and went through it, and the troll was stuck for 3 seconds, pulling at the stone, which was enough time. Harry put his hand on the troll's back, flat between the shoulder blades. He pushed it downward, not with anger, not with effort, but with the simple and total application of what he was, and the troll went to the floor with a sound that shook the entire corridor and lay there, stunned, chest heaving. Harry looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at the bathroom door, what was left of it. "Hermione," he said, a beat. Then Hermione appeared in the ruined doorframe, hair everywhere, robes dusty from debris, holding her wand in a grip that had left white marks on her knuckles. She looked at Harry, she looked at the troll on the floor, she looked at Harry again. "You caught the club," she said. "Yes," Harry said, with one hand. "I was closer than Ron," Harry said, which was true but not exactly the point. She looked at the troll again. It was still down, breathing in long, dazed bellows, not unconscious but not interested in getting up. "How long will it stay like that?" "Long enough," Harry said. "Are you hurt?" She looked at herself like she was checking inventory. I'm number behind Harry. Ron had come up the corridor and was looking at the troll with an expression that went through several phases very quickly, shock, relief, something that was trying to be casual and not quite making it. Right, Ron said. So you just yeah, okay. Can you cast a binding jinx? Harry asked him. Ron blinked. Yeah, probably, I think. Probably is fine, Harry said. We need it held until the professors arrive. Ron pointed his wand at the troll with the expression of someone summoning their courage to a specific location. Incarcerus. The ropes appeared, wrapped around the troll's wrists and ankles, thickened when the troll tested them with a groggy, instinctive pull. Ron looked at his wand. That worked. Of course it worked, Harry said. I wasn't sure it would work, Ron clarified. The professors arrived 30 seconds later. McGonagall, Snape, and Quirrell in that order. McGonagall stopped in the corridor doorway and took in the scene. The unconscious troll, the bound troll, the demolished walls, 3 first-years standing in the rubble. The silence was a specific kind of silence. Would someone, McGonagall said in a voice of extraordinary restraint, like to explain? The explanation took 20 minutes and satisfied no one completely, which Harry considered optimal. He had given a version of events that was true in all its details and somewhat abbreviated in its specifics. There had been a troll, they had heard Hermione was missing, they had come to find her, the troll had been subdued. He left out the part where he'd caught a tree trunk club with one hand and pushed 1,200 pounds of troll to the floor like he was setting down a suitcase. McGonagall's expression during the explanation suggested she suspected the abbreviated nature of it. Snape's expression suggested he was cataloging the abbreviations for future reference. Quirrell said nothing at all, which Harry noted. 5 points were taken from Gryffindor each for being out of the feast without permission. 5 points were given to each of them, Harry, Ron, Hermione, for presence of mind in a dangerous situation. Hermione received an additional 5 for keeping calm. The points roughly balanced, which Harry suspected was the point. When the professors moved away to deal with the troll, Hermione grabbed Harry's arm, not dramatically, practically the way you grab someone when you need them to stay still long enough to hear something. You pushed it down, she said quietly, with one hand. Hermione, I saw it. Her voice was low, precisely controlled, the voice she used when she was assembling something. I was watching from the doorway. You caught the club one-handed and then you pushed a 12-foot troll to the ground with the same effort I used to close a heavy book. She paused. That is not magic. Harry looked at her. At the intelligence in her face, the refusal to be comfortable with what she didn't understand. He'd promised her in the common room that he'd tell her more when she'd built her framework. He looked at the troll being levitated away by 4 professors, ropes still around it. Not tonight, he said, but soon. She held his gaze for 3 seconds and released his arm. Soon, she repeated, and it landed as an agreement and a deadline simultaneously. Ron, who had been listening, said, I also have questions. I know, Harry said. Mine are less scientific than hers, Ron offered. I know that too, Harry said, and Ron grinned, and the 3 of them walked back toward the common room in the post-disaster quiet of a corridor full of cracked stone and the lingering smell of troll. 3 days later, Harry went to Wales. Not publicly. Not by broom, not through any method the school could track. In the deep hours of a moonless night, when the castle had gone quiet and the grounds were empty, and the wards that kept students in were built on the assumption that students couldn't leave without going through a door, Harry went through the window of an unused 4th-floor classroom. He went up first, up and through the window, out into the cold November dark, and then he was above the school and the air bit at his face and the stars were extraordinary, the Milky Way a smear of silver across the black, and he breathed it in for 3 seconds and then turned south and flew. It was not broomstick flying. It was not the directed mechanical process of urging a piece of wood through air. It was the natural state of a body that had been absorbing yellow sunlight for 11 years and had run out of reasons to stay down. He didn't go fast, not tonight, not on the way there, saving it. He crossed the Bristol Channel at 10,000 feet and came down through cloud into the damp dark of the Welsh valleys. He found the spot by memory that wasn't memory, the knowledge Jor-El's message had deposited in him, the coordinates written in his cells rather than his mind. A valley floor unremarkable, a crease between 2 sheep-grazed hills with a stream running through it and a cluster of hawthorn trees at the far end. He landed in the dark and walked to the hawthorn trees and pushed through them and found the pod. It had sunk further into the earth than it had been in his early memory. 11 years of Welsh weather had encouraged it down, so that only the upper third was visible, pale against the dark soil, organic and alien. He'd been here once before the summer he was 8, following the same embedded knowledge like a thread pulled taut. He'd pressed his hands to it and felt the warmth of it and cried, standing alone in a Welsh field, and then stopped crying and gone home. He was not crying now. He was here with purpose. He pressed both hands flat against the surface and the crystal in his pocket answered, a pulse, then another, and then the pod opened. Not dramatically. A seam appeared and widened and warm light came from inside, golden amber, the color of late afternoon on a world he'd never seen. Inside the pod were 3 things. The first was the impression of himself, newborn, the curved space where an infant had traveled between stars, lined with something that was not foam and not metal but had properties of both, shaped by decades of vacancy into the ghost of a small body. The second was a row of crystals along the interior wall, 14 of them, each a different opacity, each pulsing with a slow and independent light. The third was a projection surface, a flat plate of something that was not glass set into the curved wall that lit when Harry touched it. Jor-El's face, not a voice this time, a face rendered in light, three-dimensional and still, and then moving, a recording, yes, but more complete than the crystal's voice. His father looked like what Harry saw in the mirror every morning if he replaced the black hair with something lighter, and the green eyes with gray. If he added the specific gravitas of a man who has built his life's work into a vessel small enough to carry one child. Kal-El, Jor-El said, and even in recording the voice had the texture of someone choosing words with the awareness that they are the last words they will choose. If you're here, then you found the coordinates. That means you've listened to the crystal, which means you know enough to look for more. Good, that is my son. Harry sat cross-legged on the earth in front of the pod and listened. The recording told him about Krypton's science, the solar absorption capacity of Kryptonian cells, the density of his physiology, the neurological architecture that gave him the eidetic recall and the enhanced sensory processing. It told him about the council and its failures, about the stubbornness of systems that prefer their own collapse to the admission of error. It told him about his mother, Lara, who had designed the life support for the pod and worked through the night to perfect it and put him inside with her hands steady and her face doing what it was doing. You will be extraordinary under a yellow sun, Jor-El said. More than I intended, I gave you Krypton's knowledge, but the yellow sun gives you more than knowledge. It gives you capability beyond anything I modeled. I do not know your limits, Kal-El. I am not sure you have them in the conventional sense. Harry thought about the troll, about the club in his hand, about the ease of it. But capability is only as good as the character that directs it, Jor-El continued, and Harry heard the father in the scientist's voice, the love threading through the data. Krypton had limitless capability and chose too late to use it. Do not make that choice. Do not wait. Whatever world has taken you in, be present in it. Be responsible to it. He paused. Be more than I could be. The recording ended. Harry sat in the dark with the pod glowing around him and the Welsh hills breathing cold air over the hawthorns and the stream making its small, persistent noise nearby. He thought about billions of people. He tried to actually think about it, not the number, which was too large to feel, but the people. Someone who loved music, someone who was bad at mornings, someone who argued with their family about small things and thought there was always time to fix it later. Billions of versions of that, all gone into yellow starlight in a way, gone into him in a way which was either beautiful or unbearable depending on which moment you caught him in. He sat there for a long time. Then he got up, closed the pod, and flew home. He found Ron awake when he got back, sitting in the common room in the dark with a glass of water, which was unusual enough that Harry stopped in the portrait hole and looked at him before climbing through. Couldn't sleep, Ron said by way of explanation. Harry climbed through the portrait hole. He was cold from the flight, which took a few minutes to work back out of him as his cells processed the indoor warmth and the ambient light and recalibrated. He sat in the chair opposite Ron and let the fire do its work. You went somewhere, Ron said, not accusatory, just observational. Wales, Harry said. Ron took this in stride because Ron had an excellent instinct for which things to press on and which things to simply accompany. Was it good, Wales? Harry thought about how to say what he wanted to say, which was not something he did often. He was usually either saying it or not saying it, and the middle space of trying to find the words was unfamiliar territory. You know how some things are both true at once, he said. Like something can be awful and also the most important thing at the same time and you can't separate them. Yeah, Ron said without hesitation. Yeah, I know that. There's a place in Wales, Harry said. It has to do with where I come from, not my parents. Before that, further back. He stopped, considered. I'm not from here, Ron, not originally, not from Britain, not from Earth. There was a world before this one and I was born there and then it was destroyed and I'm what's left of it. The fire crackled. Ron's glass of water sat on the table between them. The whole world, Ron said, the whole world. Ron was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that is not the absence of response but the presence of someone actually sitting with what they've just been told and giving it the weight it deserves. That's, Ron said. He stopped, tried again. I don't have the right word for that. My family's been here for 9 generations and I can't imagine what it would be like if there was no more Weasleys anywhere, not just me but the whole, all of it, and that's just my family. Billions of people, Harry said. Billions, Ron repeated very quietly. He looked at the fire. And you're just walking around Hogwarts, eating breakfast, doing homework. Yes, Harry said. That's mental, Ron said. It is, Harry agreed. are you all right? Ron said, and he asked it the way he asked everything, without ceremony, without the self-conscious performance of concern. Just directly, the way you ask someone if they're all right when you actually want to know. Harry thought about it honestly. Yes and no, he said. I think I will be. Ron nodded. That was enough for him. That was one of the best things about Ron. Enough was always actually enough. Wales, Ron said after a while. Wales, Harry confirmed. Do you want some of my water? I'm fine, thanks. They sat by the fire until the castle's deep midnight settled around them and the portraits began snoring and the fire burned down to ember orange. And Harry felt something loosen in his chest that he hadn't noticed was tight until the loosening. The specific tension of carrying something alone in a space too small for it, and then setting it down just partially, just enough. Dumbledore's invitation arrived by way of a bird. Not an owl, not the standard Hogwarts correspondence owl, brown and officious. This was a phoenix, which Harry recognized from Jor-El's uploaded zoological knowledge as much as from Hermione's whispered, that's a phoenix from across the common room. It was red gold and the size of a swan, and it landed on the arm of Harry's chair and looked at him with golden eyes that contained something ancient and amused. In its beak was a note. Small, folded once. Harry, I wonder if you might join me for tea at 6 this evening. 3rd floor, the gargoyle knows the password. Albus Dumbledore. The phoenix lingered long enough for Harry to take the note, then lifted off, trailing a handful of sparks, and was gone through the window before anyone could do more than stare. Tea with Dumbledore, Ron said. Tea with Dumbledore, Harry confirmed. Hermione said from her chair without looking up, be careful. Harry looked at her. She was reading or performing reading. Her eyes were on the page, but her attention wasn't. Why do you say that? He asked. She did look up then. Because he's the most powerful wizard alive, and he invited a first year for tea in early November for no stated reason, she said. That's not hospitality, that's information gathering. Harry folded the note and put it in his pocket. I know, he said. The gargoyle said sherbet lemon, which Dumbledore had apparently communicated at some point, or possibly the gargoyle simply knew, which seemed more likely given that everything in this castle knew more than it let on. The spiral staircase revolved upward and Harry rode it with his hands behind his back, mapping the tower as he rose. The office was extraordinary. Not in the way the Great Hall was extraordinary, not scale and spectacle, but in the way of accumulated time. Books and instruments and portraits of past headmasters and shelves, crowded with objects that hummed and ticked and rotated on their own private schedules. A pensive on a stone pedestal, Fawkes the Phoenix on his perch, who turned his golden head toward Harry with the expression of a creature that has seen everything and found most of it interesting. Dumbledore was behind his desk and he stood when Harry came in, which was a choice. Adults didn't typically stand for first years. Harry, he said, thank you for coming. Sit down, please, tea. Thank you, Harry said, and sat in the chair across the desk and accepted the cup and looked at Dumbledore with the same clear attention he gave everything. Dumbledore looked back. The half-moon spectacles caught the candlelight. The expression was warm, layered, and organized. I hope the term has been treating you well, Dumbledore said. It has, Harry said. You want to talk about more than the term. Dumbledore's expression shifted, not dramatically, a slight rearrangement, like a hand of cards being held a different way. Direct, he said. Good, yes, I do. He looked at Harry for a moment, choosing, Harry thought, how much to give away. You're aware, Dumbledore said carefully, that this school is home to certain protections. Measures put in place for the safekeeping of something valuable. Yes, Harry said. A pause. You've deduced this. It's hard not to, Harry said. The 3rd floor corridor you told us not to go in, the dog behind the trapdoor, a 3-headed dog, a Cerberus, which means it was sourced specifically, which means someone who knows their magical creatures put it there deliberately, and the pull I've felt since the night I arrived. He met Dumbledore's eyes. Something is being kept here. Someone wants to get to it. You wanted me nearby. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. Outside the tower windows, the November sky was the color of pewter, and the wind moved through the castle's battlements with a sound like patience. You felt a pull, Dumbledore said. Through my scar, Harry said. Though not only through my scar. Dumbledore set down his teacup. He looked at Harry over his spectacles in a way that was very different from the warm, managed gaze of a minute ago, more open, more direct, the look of someone deciding to be honest and organizing themselves to do it. Harry, he said, I am going to ask you something, and I would appreciate whatever truth you feel comfortable giving. Ask, Harry said. What are you? Dumbledore said, quietly, not unkindly. With the genuine weight of someone who has been asking themselves this question for months. Harry looked at him. He thought about Wales, about Jor-El's face in amber light, about billions of people gone into yellow starlight. I'm a wizard, Harry said. A good one, I think, though it's early. I'm also, he paused, finding the words, something that doesn't have a word in any language you know. My birth world had a name for what I am, but the world is gone. You'd need the language for the name to mean anything. Dumbledore absorbed this with extraordinary stillness. Your birth world, he said. Not Earth, Harry said simply. The silence in the office was total except for the instruments ticking and Fawkes shifting on his perch and the wind outside. Lily's protection, Dumbledore said, slowly, carefully, like someone reading a map that turns out to be larger than the map case it came in. When the killing curse struck you, the curse hit something that couldn't die from it, Harry said. My mother's magic worked, her sacrifice worked, but what it had to work with wasn't ordinary. My cells process energy differently. The curse had nowhere to go. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. You knew something was different. The instruments told you the night I arrived. The instruments, Dumbledore said, and glanced at the shelves with an expression that was almost rueful, did not give me useful readings. They gave me readings that were unprecedented and which I have spent the past 2 months trying to understand. And, Harry said, and I have not understood them, Dumbledore said, with the honesty of a man who finds this genuinely difficult to admit. Harry nodded. He picked up his tea, drank, set it down. The thing in the school, he said. I'm going to find out what it is eventually. I'd rather know now. Dumbledore looked at him. The calculation was still there, the chess player's assessment, the weighing of what to reveal against what to keep, but something had shifted in it. The calculation was now operating on a different problem. Not what does this child need to believe, but what does this being need to know? A philosopher's stone, Dumbledore said. A stone that can transform any metal into gold and produce the elixir of life. It is the only one in existence and it belongs to a friend of mine. Someone wants it and they are closer than I would like. Someone connected to the pull, Harry said. Yes. Quirrell, Harry said. The silence this time was different, sharper. What makes you say that? Dumbledore said very quietly. Something wrong with him, Harry said. Not nervous wrong underneath. Cold in a way that has nothing to do with temperature. He paused. He tried to look into my mind during potions last month. He didn't get anything, but he was there. That was Quirrell, Dumbledore said, and something moved in his face, surprise, quickly managed, and Harry filed this away. Dumbledore had suspected Snape. He'd been watching Snape. Snape was actually in his way trying to protect the stone and Dumbledore had partially misread it. Not Snape, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. No, he said after a moment. Evidently not. They sat in the candlelit office with the wind around the tower and Fawkes watching them both with golden eyes. What will you do? Harry asked. Reinforce the protections, Dumbledore said. Monitor, act when the time comes. He looked at Harry. And you? Learn what I can, Harry said. Be ready. Harry, Dumbledore's voice was careful, soft. Whatever you are, whatever abilities you possess, I would caution against using them without checking with you first, Harry said without heat. Dumbledore held his gaze. He had the grace not to deny it. I appreciate the concern, Harry said and stood because the tea was finished and the conversation had reached its natural end. But I don't answer to the threat, I answer to what's right. He paused. I think those are aligned here. I'm not looking for a fight. He picked up his cup and placed it neatly on Dumbledore's desk. But if something happens, I'll handle it. You should know that. He walked to the door. His hand was on the frame when Dumbledore spoke. Your mother, Dumbledore said, was one of the finest witches I ever knew. She had a gift for caring precisely and without reservation, for choosing over and over to love when it would have been easier not to. He paused. I see that in you. Harry stood in the doorway for a moment. He thought about Lily Potter who had loved him enough to die, and Lara of Krypton who had built a pod's life support with steady hands, and what it meant to be made twice over by women who chose love under impossible circumstances. I know, he said. I think about that a lot. He went down the spiral staircase and the gargoyle watched him go, and above in the office the instruments ticked and spun in their unprecedented configurations, and Dumbledore sat very still for a very long time. On the night of the 28th of November, Quirrell made his first real move. Harry felt it as a change in the Scarple, not directional anymore but urgent, immediate, the way a phone rings differently when the call matters. He was in the library, sitting across from Hermione who was deep in magical theory with a look of focused pleasure that meant she'd found something interesting, when the urgency hit him like a change in barometric pressure. He closed his book. Hermione looked up. Now, she said, reading him the way she'd learned to read him, not the words but the frequency. Not yet, Harry said, but something's moving. He went to the restricted section that night, not breaking in, not using any dramatic mechanism of entry, simply applying the correct amount of pressure to the chain latch in a way that left it undamaged and open. He needed to know what was between Quirrell and the stone. He needed the full map of what had been put down there, what he was potentially walking into. He found references across 6 books, cross-referenced them in 40 minutes using the Kryptonian recall that made research feel like sorting, and built the picture. Devil's Snare, flying keys, a giant chess set, a logic puzzle, something else that wasn't in any book, which meant either it was Dumbledore's own enchantment or someone else's that he hadn't catalogued yet. He sat with the information and thought about Quirrell's shadow, about the cold thing beneath the nervousness, about what Voldemort's presence felt like through an 11-year-old scar, and what it might mean that Quirrell carried it with him into every class, into every corridor, every day. Someone wants it. Not for gold, not for immortality, though immortality was the obvious answer, and wrong answers were always the obvious ones. Voldemort was not afraid of death the way most people are afraid of death. He was afraid of it the way a mathematician is afraid of an unsolved equation. It was an affront, a wrongness in the structure of the universe that needed correcting. Harry thought about what you become when you're afraid of the thing that makes everything else meaningful. He thought about Krypton's council, so certain of their own continued existence that they couldn't conceive of the alternative until it was too late. He shelved the books carefully and walked back through the dark castle, following the hum of the stones, and thought that Voldemort and Krypton's elders had something in common that neither would have appreciated being told. December arrived like a door opening onto a cold room. The castle put up decorations, Christmas ones, enormous trees and enchanted frost and floating candles that burned warm gold against the winter dark, and the students divided into two camps, those going home for the holidays and those staying. Harry was staying. He stood at the window of the common room on the last morning of term and watched the carriages take students to Hogsmeade Station. Ron was going, the whole Weasley contingent, loud and warm and red-haired, bundling into carriages with trunks that were arguably too large for them. Ron had clapped Harry on the shoulder the night before and said, "Right, yeah," Hedwig's fast with the manner of someone who expected this to be honored, which Harry did. Hermione was going home. She'd hugged him at the portrait hole, a brief, firm hug that lasted exactly long enough to mean something, and told him to be careful, which she said every time they parted now, not as a pleasantry but as a specific instruction. The school went quiet in the particular way that large spaces go quiet when they're not empty but much less full than they were. The remaining students, a dozen Gryffindors, a handful from other houses, rattled around in the common room with the slightly dazed freedom of people who have been handed time they don't know what to do with. Harry knew what to do with it. He flew. At night, when the grounds were dark and the sky was clear and the cold bit his face, and found he couldn't quite manage to make him uncomfortable, he went higher than he'd gone since Wales, above the cloud layer, into the airspace where the stars lost their atmospheric shimmer and became something more precise and extraordinary. He floated at 20,000 feet over Scotland and looked up at the universe and breathed very slowly. He found the red point of light that was Rao, Krypton's sun, seen across 45 light-years. A red dwarf now, almost certainly dimmer than it had been, its energy output changed by the catastrophic loss of the planet that had orbited it. He looked at it for a long time. He thought of Jor-El. He thought of Lara with her steady hands. He thought of Lily Potter standing between him and something that could not be stood between, and doing it anyway, and the thing that happened when two kinds of love combined into something the universe hadn't prepared a category for. He thought, "I am the category." He turned his face back toward the school below, the lit windows, the towers, the warm and improbable home of it, and dropped back down through the cloud and landed on the Quidditch pitch with the silent precision of someone who has done this enough times that the landing is merely arriving. The castle watched him come back in. He could feel it, that resonant attention, in the way the entrance hall torches seemed to burn a half-degree warmer, the way the staircase didn't pull any tricks on the way to Gryffindor Tower. He climbed through the portrait hole, sat down by the fire and took out his crystal. He held it in his palm and let the firelight move through it and thought about what was coming, because it was coming. The pull in the scar said so. Quirrell's hunger said so. The thing beneath the school, awake and patient and waiting. A stone that could give life indefinitely to someone who had spent decades building themselves on the refusal to accept death. That said so. Harry held the crystal in the warm fire quiet of an almost empty Gryffindor common room and felt the castle settle around him and thought, "When it comes, I'll be ready." The fire snapped and settled. The castle breathed. Outside, in the deep cold of a Scottish December, stars burned above the cloud cover with the patient and indifferent intensity of things that have been burning for billions of years and expect to be burning for billions more. The red one, barely visible, burned with them. Chapter 4, The Philosopher's Stone and the Man Behind the Mirror. The trap sprung on a Tuesday. Harry felt it happen at 3 in the morning, not in the scar, not this time, but in the castle itself. The resonance that had been his constant background frequency since September changed pitch, the way a held note changes when something interrupts the instrument producing it. He was awake before the feeling fully registered, sitting up in bed with his heart doing exactly what it always did, which was beat at the same steady rate it always beat because his body didn't do panic. He listened. Fluffy, he'd taken to calling the three-headed dog Fluffy in the privacy of his own mind, because naming things helped him think about them clearly, was not moving. The resonance from the third-floor corridor was wrong in the specific way that something is wrong when it has been chemically or magically sedated, a stillness that wasn't natural sleep but something imposed on it. Quirrell was moving. Harry could feel it through the building the way you feel a current in still water, directional, purposeful, already past the third-floor door. He was out of bed before he'd made a conscious decision about it. He dressed without lighting anything, moving in the dark with the ease of someone for whom dark was not actually dark. He pulled his father's invisibility cloak off the hook where he'd hung it. He'd found it at Christmas, a gift from Dumbledore with a note that said, "Only your father left this in my keeping," and then set it back down again. He didn't need it. He walked out of the dormitory, down the stairs, through the portrait hole, and into the castle. McGonagall was on the 7th floor. He felt her there as he passed the 5th, that particular magical signature he'd been cataloging unconsciously all term, the compressed precision of a transfiguration master in motion. He paused on the landing. She was heading for Dumbledore's office, running, actually, which meant she knew or suspected or had been watching and had just seen the confirmation. Dumbledore was not in his office. Harry had felt this an hour ago without noting its significance, the absence of a very particular presence from the tower. Dumbledore had been summoned, or had arranged to be summoned, which was also possible and perhaps more characteristic. He filed all of this away without stopping and kept walking down. The third-floor corridor door was open. The trapdoor beyond Fluffy was open. Fluffy himself was asleep across the floor, a massive gray weight rising and falling, three heads breathing in unison, a harp playing itself softly in the corner of the room, charmed to play, Harry supposed, or playing of its own accord, something in the castle looking after itself. Harry looked at Fluffy for a moment. He'd never actually seen the dog this close, only felt its presence through floors and walls. It was genuinely extraordinary, 3 skulls the size of boulders, the floor wet with drool, the snoring generating a low-frequency vibration he felt in his sternum. He stepped around the dog and dropped through the trapdoor. The devil's snare caught him immediately. Dark and rope-like, tendrils wrapping his wrists and ankles with the efficient enthusiasm of a plant that has found something it wants, pulling him sideways and down into the vegetation with a determined, impersonal grip. Harry looked at the vine around his wrist. It tightened. He waited for 3 seconds out of scientific interest to see if it would continue tightening indefinitely or plateau. It continued. Then he applied gentle, steady pressure in the opposite direction, and the vine, which had evolved over considerable evolutionary time to trap things no stronger than a large animal, snapped cleanly. He pulled both hands free, stepped out of the plant's reach, and brushed a tendril off his shoulder. The chamber was large and dark and smelled of soil and something acrid. Quirrell had been through here, he could smell him, that cold chemical wrongness, and the devil's snare at the center of the room was thoroughly dead, frozen solid in a circle, the aftermath of a bluebell flame's charm applied with considerable force. Harry noted the technique. Effective and fast. He moved on. The key chamber was next, high and vaulted, hundreds of winged keys turning through the air above a broomstick in the center and a locked door on the far side. Harry looked at the keys. He felt the specific magical signature of the correct one, older than the others, slightly bent in the right wing, flying erratically because it had been used recently and not allowed to fully reorient. He didn't take the broomstick. He went up under his own authority, crossed the chamber in 4 seconds, caught the key on the first grab, and unlocked the door. The chess set was where the noise was. He heard it before he reached the chamber, the grinding of stone on stone, pieces the size of refrigerators moving across a board that was half the size of a Quidditch pitch. The chamber smelled of chalk and cold stone and the specific ozone tang of active magic. Quirrell had made it through here too, though the board was significantly more disrupted than the earlier chambers. The pieces in disarray, some of them shattered. Harry stood at the edge of the board and looked at the configuration. The pieces nearest him registered his presence and shifted, uncertain, not attacking yet, waiting for him to declare a color and make a move. He thought about it for exactly 4 seconds. The White Queen was positioned 3 moves from a total board lock on the black side. Quirrell had played black. The black pieces were in the kind of disarray that spoke to someone forcing through without finesse, sacrificing strategically, getting past rather than playing, and had made it through, but it had cost pieces and time. Harry looked at the configuration and saw that the lock point the White Queen was reaching for was now undefended on black's side. He picked up a white pawn. It was the size of his torso, cool and rough under his hands, but he lifted it without difficulty and placed it in the correct square. The White Queen registered the move, turned, and crossed the board in 3 decisive stone-grinding strides to a position that trapped the Black King. The remaining black pieces froze, the door on the far side ground open. A white knight passing him as he crossed the board turned its stone head and looked at him in a way that was not quite looking, more like a held attention, something that old enchantments do when they brush against something they don't have a category for. Harry nodded to it. He wasn't sure why. It felt correct. The troll in the next chamber was already unconscious. Knocked out cold, feet up, the smell of Quirrell's magic still on it, a stunning spell of unusual power, the kind of concentrated force that came from someone channeling an entity far larger than themselves. Harry stepped around it and moved on. The potion chamber stopped him. Not because it was difficult, he'd read the riddle set, found the reference in the restricted section, memorized the solution, but because of what Quirrell had done to it. The room had 2 fires, purple and black, blocking the entrance and exit, 7 potion bottles on a table, a parchment with the riddle. Logic not magic was supposed to solve it, which bottle let you forward, which back, which were poison and which were harmless. Quirrell had solved it correctly. He could see which bottle had been taken from the table, the small ring of disrupted dust where one bottle had been lifted. Forward, he'd gone forward. Harry solved the riddle in 30 seconds, not because he was showing off, but because it was a logical structure and he processed logical structures the way water processes gravity, finding the lowest point automatically. He took the correct bottle, drank, stepped through the black fire. The heat moved over him like a warm hand and found nothing to damage and moved on. He stood in the final chamber. The mirror of Eris dominated the room. 12 feet tall, ornate frame worked in gold. The words ERISED-STRAEHRUOJTWOHSI carved in an arch along the top. Harry had read about it, Dumbledore had told him at Christmas, sitting in the empty Great Hall with 2 plates of food between them, that the mirror showed the viewer their deepest desire. He'd moved it here presumably as the final protection for the stone. Quirrell was standing in front of it, his back was to Harry. He was staring into the glass, and his hands were clasped behind him, and the wrongness Harry had been feeling all term was no longer a shadow behind a shadow. It was present and immediate. A cold pressure in the room that pressed against Harry's senses the way a smell presses into a room, filling the available space. I see it, Quirrell was saying to himself or not to himself. I see it there. But how do you get it out of the glass? Harry said from across the room. Quirrell spun around. He didn't flinch. That was the first thing Harry noticed. A flinch would have been human, the involuntary physical startle of someone caught off guard. Quirrell didn't flinch because whatever was directing him had better reflexes than surprise. His wand was up and a curse was in the air before Harry had fully finished his sentence. Harry stepped to the left. The curse hit the wall behind him and left a scorch mark the size of a dinner plate. You followed me, Quirrell said. The stutter was completely gone. Whatever it had been doing there, performance, displacement, habitual affect, it had no function now. His voice was flat and cold and terrifyingly calm. I've been watching you for 3 months, Harry said. He walked toward the center of the room, unhurried, hands at his sides. You tried to look into my mind in October. You announced the troll in the wrong corridor. You've been moving toward this since September, probably longer. He stopped 15 feet from Quirrell. You're not alone in there, are you? Quirrell's mouth pulled into something that wasn't quite a smile. No, he said, I'm not. Is he listening? Always. Harry looked at Quirrell, looked at him the way he looked at everything, the total and unhurried attention, and saw through the professor to the thing hosted behind his eyes. Not a visual sight, something older and more direct. He'd felt it in the scar all year, that cold directional pull, and now it was in the same room and the scar pulled toward it the way a compass pulls toward north, and Harry felt it and stood in it and didn't move. The stone, Harry said. You're going to use it to bring him back. Not just sustain him, restore him, full body, full power. The stone, Quirrell agreed, gives life indefinitely to those wise enough to claim it. He tilted his head. You know quite a lot for a first-year Potter. I know he can't kill me, Harry said. He already tried. Something moved in Quirrell's face, more than Quirrell moving, something beneath and behind. The boy survived a killing curse by accident of his mother's love, said a voice that was Quirrell's voice and also not Quirrell's voice, layered beneath it like a frequency you feel before you hear. Now he walks into this room as though it's a classroom exercise. Extraordinary confidence. Not confidence, Harry said. Information. He walked to the mirror. Quirrell's wand came up again. Harry didn't speed up or slow down. He walked at the same pace, and the curse Quirrell threw hit the floor 2 feet to his right, and the stone cracked and smoked, and Harry didn't look at it. He looked at the mirror. He stood in front of it and looked into the glass. The mirror showed him what it showed everyone, deepest desire. He saw it and felt it, and it was real enough to press against his sternum. He saw Jor-El and Lara, standing in a city of crystal, alive and warm, and looking at him with recognition. He saw James and Lily Potter beside them, all four parents standing together in the impossible space of a mirror's promise. James with his hand on Jor-El's shoulder, Lily laughing at something Lara had said. The two families collapsed into one in the way that things only happen in Desire's architecture. He stood there for 2 seconds. 3. Then he looked away into his own reflection's eyes, and the boy in the glass blinked. The boy in the glass, Harry himself, his own reflection, smiled and reached into his pocket and held up something small that caught the light. The stone, in his reflection's hand. Which meant in his pocket, in his hand in reality, because that was how the mirror worked when you wanted it not for use but for itself, when you wanted to find it rather than use it. Dumbledore had told him that sitting in the empty Great Hall, and Harry had filed it away. The protection had worked exactly as designed. He reached into his pocket. His fingers closed around the stone. It was warm, heavier than it looked, roughly egg-shaped, a deep arterial red, smooth as river stone. He held it in his palm for a moment with the same attentiveness he gave everything. This is the only philosopher's stone in existence. This is what Nicholas Flamel made and spent centuries studying. This is what Voldemort has been hunting. He closed his fingers around it and turned around. Quirrell had not moved. He was watching with an expression that Harry had not seen on a human face before, hunger and cold intelligence, and behind both of those, something ancient and furious that was trying to control the face it was watching through. "Give it to me," Quirrell said, and again the voice was layered, and behind the classroom-appropriate word give was something that had no classroom-appropriate translation. "No," Harry said. The curse was faster this time, faster than the previous two, faster than a human reaction time would handle, a blasting curse in a straight line at Harry's chest. Harry caught it on his forearm, not intentionally, not as a technique. His arm came up the way your arm comes up when something flies at your face, reflex older than thought, and the curse hit his forearm and the shockwave went up his shoulder, and into his chest, and his feet left the ground for half a second before he came back down. His forearm was unscratched. He looked at it, looked at Quirrell. Quirrell looked at his arm. "I see," said the voice beneath Quirrell's voice. "I see," and the hunger in it shifted, not gone, not diminished, but reorganized around a new shape. Around this, around Harry, around the specific and unprecedented fact of what he was. "You are not what I was told you were." "No," Harry agreed. "What are you?" "Someone who's going to leave here with the stone," Harry said. Quirrell launched himself across the room, not magic, physical, bodily, with the supernatural speed of something that was not remotely limited to human capability. He crossed 15 feet in a second, and his hands reached for Harry's closed fist, and his hands wrapped around Harry's wrist. Then he screamed. It was a terrible sound. Not Quirrell's pain exactly, or Quirrell's pain was part of it but not the center of it. The screaming came from the place where Quirrell's hands contacted Harry's skin, and the contact point went white, went blistered, went wrong, and the thing behind Quirrell's eyes screamed too, a frequency Harry felt in his back teeth, in the crystal in his other pocket, in the scar pulled so tight it burned. Lily Potter's magic, still alive in Harry's cells after 11 years. Still burning, still choosing, still refusing to accept what it refused to accept. Combined with something else, with the cellular warmth of 11 years of yellow sunlight, with the biological fact of what Harry was made of. Quirrell tried to pull back. Harry held his wrists, not to harm him. He wasn't trying to harm him. He held on because if he let go, Quirrell would go for the stone again, and then someone would have to make a worse choice. He held on with the same gentle, total, immovable force he'd applied to everything that needed containing this year, the troll, the club, the moment in the corridor with Draco, the chess board, and Quirrell's hands went white and then gray, and then Quirrell's legs gave out. Harry let go. Quirrell went to the floor. He lay still, breathing in ragged pulls, his hands held away from his body, the skin where they'd touched Harry's wrists looking burned in a way that was already visibly spreading to the rest of him. "She's still in you," said the voice from the floor, from Quirrell's cracked lips. And now it was only cold, the hunger was gone, the calculation was gone, just cold, and something beneath the cold that might have been recognition. A dead woman's love, in a body from another world. A sound that was not quite a laugh. "Dumbledore," it said, and the word had a texture, the way a name has texture when someone has spent decades turning it over, said the power I know not was love. I assumed, another breath, I assumed he meant it as a comfort, as something soft. Harry crouched in front of Quirrell. He looked at him, at what was left, because the man was failing, his body breaking down under the competing requirements of two entities and the aftermath of contact with something his existence was not built for. He looked at him and felt the grief of it, the waste of it, a man who must have been capable and intelligent and human once, before he went looking in the wrong direction for something he thought would fill whatever was empty. "Where will you go?" Harry said. He wasn't being cruel. He wanted to know. Quirrell's eyes, no longer fully Quirrell's, looked at him from the floor. "Further than you think," the voice said. "I have done it before. I am very good at surviving." I know, Harry said. You're not afraid of me, the voice said, and this time it was not a statement of fury or calculation. It was almost a statement of something else. Curiosity, maybe, or the ghost of it. I know what you are, Harry said. A man who decided a very long time ago that death was the only problem. Everything you've done since then has been the solution to that problem. That's not frightening. He paused. It's a waste. The voice said nothing. Quirrell's eyes dimmed. Then the entity left. Harry felt it go, a cold displacement of air. A pressure that had been in the room for an hour suddenly absent, the temperature rising half a degree in the space of a second. Quirrell went limp. His breathing continued thin, damaged, but the wrongness was gone, and what was left in the room was one very damaged man and one 11-year-old and a mirror that showed desires and a stone in a closed fist. Harry stood up. He looked at the mirror. His reflection looked back at him, just him now, no parents, no crystal cities, just himself in the glass, with his black hair and his mother's eyes and his hand closed around the stone. He put it in his pocket. He looked at Quirrell for a long moment. Then he went to the door. He came back up through the chambers, through the potion room, stepping over the broken black fire's ash, through the chess set which had reset itself in his absence into a configuration that made no strategic sense, the pieces milling in uncertain patterns, the board cleared of Quirrell's destructive passage, restored by whatever enchantment maintained it. The White Queen turned her enormous stone head as he crossed, and he nodded to her again, and she turned away. Through the key chamber, which he crossed on foot this time because there was no urgency and he was thinking. Through the devil's snare, which reached tentative tendrils toward him and then withdrew, apparently deciding against it. Up through the trapdoor, past Fluffy who was still asleep, past the harp which played on. He came out on the third-floor corridor. Dumbledore was there, not with urgency, not rushing toward the trapdoor, standing very still near the window at the end of the corridor, moonlight making him silver, his expression doing something that Harry had not seen it do before. Something that was not calculated at all. You went in, Dumbledore said. Yes, Harry said. You were not supposed to. Dumbledore stopped himself, started again. Are you hurt? Number. Dumbledore's eyes moved to Harry's pocket, then back up. You have it, he said. Yes, a silence. The moonlight moved with a passing cloud and came back. Quirrell, Dumbledore said. Alive, Harry said. In the final chamber, he needs Madame Pomfrey quickly. His hands are burned and the other thing is gone. He paused. It left. Whatever Voldemort was doing through Quirrell, it left when I touched him. It'll look for another host. Dumbledore closed his eyes for a moment. Something passed across his face, relief, grief, the complicated weather of a man who has been carrying too many things for too long. When he opened them, he looked at Harry with the open, direct attention Harry had glimpsed in the office and seen more of since, the face underneath the managed expression. Harry, he said, I owe you an apology. For what specifically? Harry said. For believing this situation was mine to manage, Dumbledore said. For placing you at the center of something I thought I was directing without considering that you might have your own understanding of it. Harry thought about this. It deserved an honest answer. You were trying to protect people, he said. The stone, Flamel, the school, your methods needed adjustment, but the intention was good. He looked at Dumbledore. The apology is accepted. Dumbledore looked at him with something he couldn't quite name, the way adults sometimes looked at him when he said something that didn't fit their architecture of what 11-year-olds were supposed to say. Not patronizing, not uncomfortable, something closer to recognition. What will you do with it? Dumbledore asked. Harry reached into his pocket. He held the stone in his palm between them in the moonlight. It glowed faintly, that deep arterial red, warm as something living. He looked at it for a moment. He thought about what it could do. He thought about Nicholas Flamel, who had lived for 600 years on the strength of it. He thought about Voldemort's cold hunger, the thing that had looked at him from Quirrell's face and called love something soft. And he thought about what it meant to spend 600 years, to spend decades, to spend a lifetime, refusing the thing that made everything else mean something. He was the last son of a world of billions. He knew what it felt like to be what remained. He understood, in a way he didn't imagine many people could, the pull of more time, more life, one more chance. And he looked at the stone and thought, Number, this is not what more time looks like. This is what fear looks like when it has 6 centuries to practice. He closed his fingers around it. I'll give it to you, he said. For Flamel, he should decide what happens to it, it's his, but I'd suggest he gives it some serious thought. Dumbledore took the stone with both hands carefully, the way you carry something that has weight beyond its mass. Destroy it, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. Eventually, Harry said, when Flamel has made his peace with it, the thing Voldemort wants most shouldn't exist in a world where Voldemort exists, even if he's temporarily without a body. That is, Dumbledore said very quietly, a profound suggestion for someone of your age. I'm older than 11, Harry said, in some ways. He walked past Dumbledore toward the staircase. He was tired, not the bone tired of someone taxed beyond their limits, but the quiet fatigue of someone who has been paying full attention for several hours and is ready to put it down. Harry, Dumbledore said behind him. He stopped without turning. Your parents both sets, Dumbledore said, and the both sets landed carefully, deliberately, an acknowledgement Harry hadn't expected, would be, I think, very proud. Harry stood on the landing with the moonlight through the window and the castle breathing around him and something warm in his chest that was not solar energy. I know, he said. I think about that too. He went upstairs. The hospital wing in the morning was white and smelled of medicinal potions, and Madame Pomfrey's particular brand of competent authority. Harry had come involuntarily to be checked over, because Pomfrey had heard he'd been involved in something and had given him the look of a woman who would not be managed out of doing her job. She ran her diagnostic spells with the brisk efficiency of someone who had been doing this for 40 years and had seen everything. She ran them twice when the first pass gave her unusual readings. She ran them a third time and then stood very still with her wand in her hand and looked at Harry with an expression he was accustomed to. Your readings, she said precisely, are not standard. I know, Harry said. Your bone density is, she checked the chart the spell had produced, approximately 4 times the standard value for a child your age. Your cellular, she looked up. This is not a medical condition. No, Harry said. Are you in pain? Number, are you well? Yes, he said, genuinely. She looked at him for another moment, the diagnostic chart in her hands, and then she folded it up very carefully and put it in her pocket and said with the deliberateness of someone making a professional decision, I'm going to say you're fit for release because every metric I can measure says you are, and the ones I can't measure are above my pay grade. Thank you, Madame Pomfrey, Harry said. Don't thank me, she said. Come back if anything bothers you. I will, he said, and meant it. Ron and Hermione were waiting in the corridor outside. Ron was holding a paper bag of something that smelled like sandwiches. Hermione was holding her notebook, which told Harry everything he needed to know about each of them. Well, Ron said. Harry looked at them, his 2 people, the red-haired boy who'd shared his sweets on a train and given him enough without asking for anything, the brown-haired girl building a new framework because the old one couldn't hold him. The stone's safe, Harry said. Quirrell's being treated. Voldemort, he paused, chose the right word, retreated. Ron let out a breath that suggested he'd been holding it for longer than one night. You went down there alone. There wasn't time to wake you, Harry said. There was probably time, Ron said without heat. There probably was, Harry agreed. Next time I'll wake you. Ron handed him a sandwich. There shouldn't be a next time, he said, but knowing our year there will be. Harry took the sandwich. Hermione, he said, before you open the notebook, yes, we can talk about all of it. I'll answer every question. Hermione closed the notebook, then opened it, then closed it again. You're insufferably, she searched for the word, perceptive, Ron offered. I was going to say prepared, she said. She looked at Harry. Are you all right? There it was, both of them in their different ways, the same question. He thought about Wales and the pod and Jor-El's face in amber light, and a world he'd never seen and parents he'd never known and a stone that could give life and didn't deserve to, and a face in a mirror that showed him what he wanted most, and what he wanted most was people alive who were dead, and he was learning to hold that without it holding him. Yes, he said, and then because it was true and they'd earned the truth, getting better. Ron nodded. Hermione turned a page and wrote something. They walked back through the castle, the 3 of them side by side, in the warm morning light of a June that was pushing through the corridor windows in long bars that smelled of grass and open air and the particular promise of a term almost over. Harry walked with them and felt the castle around him, resonant and attentive, and felt the stone's absence in his pocket, and felt something else in its place that didn't have a Kryptonian name or an English one but was present and real and warm. He was the last son of Krypton. He was a wizard of Gryffindor. He was 11 years old and had just looked Voldemort in the face and told him love wasn't soft, and he was eating a sandwich in a school that had chosen him as specifically as he had chosen it. He was, he thought, going to be fine, more than fine. Chapter 5, Terms. The end-of-year feast was loud and gold and smelled of everything good that a kitchen full of house elves could produce, and Harry sat in the middle of it and felt it wash over him the way sunlight washed over him, total, warm, received without effort. Gryffindor won the House Cup. This was announced by Dumbledore with a specific kind of theatrical timing that Harry suspected was not accidental. He'd let the point stand through most of the feast, Slytherin ahead by a margin that made the green table insufferable, before standing and adding last-minute points for the underground confrontation in a sequence that swept Gryffindor past Slytherin so decisively that the Slytherin table went the color of old milk. Harry received 50 points for his role, which he thought was simultaneously an undervaluation and a generous political choice by Dumbledore. Too many points would have raised questions, and Dumbledore was, whatever else he was, a man who understood the architecture of institutional narrative. Ron got 50 points for the chess set. Hermione got 50 for the logic puzzle, which she'd solved from Harry's description of it in the hospital corridor, and refused to be talked out of receiving credit for. Neville got 10 for nerve, which made Neville go the color of a sunset and stare at the table with a smile he couldn't contain. Draco Malfoy at the Slytherin table stared across the hall at Harry with an expression that was working through several things simultaneously. Harry caught his eye once briefly and didn't perform anything at it, no triumph, no gloating, just looked back with the same equanimity he gave everything, and Malfoy looked away first, which was becoming a pattern. The Weasley twins started a song. McGonagall attempted to stop it, succeeded in reducing the volume by approximately 30%, and accepted this outcome with the quiet pragmatism of someone who picks their battles intelligently. Harry ate treacle tart and thought about the year. He went to find Hagrid after the feast, not because he had specific business. Because Hagrid had been the first person to look at him and say you've got her eyes and mean it without agenda. And Harry had found that over the course of the year he returned to Hagrid's company the way you return to a fire when you've been out in the cold. Not dramatically, not consciously, but because the warmth is reliable and real. Hagrid's hut was lit from within, the windows golden, the smell of something burning that was probably supposed to be a cake reaching Harry while he was still halfway across the grounds. He knocked. The door opened immediately. "Harry," Hagrid said with the volume of someone who has been alone all evening and is very glad to see a person. Come in, I was trying a recipe, it hasn't gone perfectly." The recipe was on fire in a small way on the kitchen counter. Harry walked past Hagrid, picked up the pot and set it in the stone sink and ran water on it, which was sufficient. "Right," Hagrid said. "You didn't have to, it's fine," Harry said. He sat down at Hagrid's table, which was enormous and battered and held the rings of 1,000 mugs. "How are you?" Hagrid sat across from him, which caused the chair to express concern in a structural way. "I'm all right," he said. "I heard about, well, everyone heard." He looked at Harry with his beetle-black eyes, warm and worried and careful. "Yeah, all right, honestly." "Honestly," Harry said, "yes. I should have, if I'd known what Quirrell was, I never thought he." Hagrid's beard compressed as his jaw tightened. "And it was me who told him Abu Fluffy, me. I told him how to get past him, the music, I told him that at the Hog's Head and I didn't even, I was so stupid." "Hagrid," Harry said. "He gave me a dragon's egg," Hagrid said miserably. "I always wanted a dragon, he knew that somehow. Knew exactly what to offer and I told him everything he needed over a few drinks like an idiot." Harry looked at him. He thought about the specific craft of someone who has spent decades learning exactly what people want and exactly how to offer it, the patience of that and the coldness of it. "You were manipulated by an expert," Harry said. "Someone who had decades of practice and a specific plan. That's not the same as being stupid." Hagrid looked at the table. "He knew what you wanted," Harry said. "He used it. That says something about him, not you." A silence. Outside, an owl called once and went quiet. "Norbert's doing well," Hagrid said after a while, which was a non-sequitur that was also not a non-sequitur. Norbert was the dragon Quirrell had provided the egg for, now relocated to Romania by Ron's brother Charlie. "Charlie says he's settled in." "Good," Harry said. "He breathed on one of the handlers," Hagrid said. "Set his beard on fire. Charlie says it's a good sign, shows spirit." "It does," Harry agreed. They sat in companionable quiet for a while, the way you sit with someone when the conversation has done its work and the company is enough on its own. "Same time next year," Harry said when he stood to leave. Hagrid's face did the warm, complicated thing it sometimes did, emotion moving through it too large for the expression to quite contain. "Yeah," he said, "same time next year." Harry walked back across the grounds in the summer evening, the lake dark and still on his left, the castle lit on his right, the sky overhead losing its last blue and going towards deep purple and then black. He floated 6 inches off the ground without deciding to. He walked the rest of the way home like that, 6 inches up, in the summer dark, in the quiet between one year and the next. Dumbledore found him the next morning. Harry was on the Quidditch pitch. Not flying, sitting on the grass at the center of the pitch with his eyes closed and his face turned up to the early sun, which was doing what it always did, which was feeding him in ways that had nothing to do with breakfast. He heard Dumbledore coming from 300 meters away, the particular cadence of his walk, unhurried, the tap of his staff, the quiet that gathered around him the way quiet gathered around old things. He didn't open his eyes until Dumbledore sat down beside him, which Dumbledore did without ceremony, lowered himself onto the grass with the slight stiffness of considerable age and arranged his robes and sat there, which Harry respected. "Headmaster sitting on the ground," Harry said. "It's good for the perspective," Dumbledore said. "I recommend it." He looked out at the empty pitch. "You're absorbing sunlight." "Yes, I have read," Dumbledore said carefully, "in the course of my research over the past year, because I have been researching, I want you to know that, several Muggle scientific accounts of solar energy and its relationship to biological systems. I have found them only partially illuminating, if you'll forgive the expression." What have you found? Harry said. That the sun is more complex than wizard kind gives it credit for, Dumbledore said. We treat it as backdrop. The astronomy curriculum addresses it in 2 paragraphs. And yet, he gestured at Harry, which was a precise and honest gesture, and yet, Harry opened his eyes. The sky above the pitch was the clear, uncomplicated blue of a June morning, the kind of blue that didn't seem real. A single cloud sat in the upper left of his vision and moved at its own pace. Ask me what you want to ask, Harry said. Dumbledore turned to look at him. I want to know what you intend, he said. Not strategically. I know you well enough by now to understand that your strategy is simply to be present and capable and honest. I mean, he paused. The pause was genuine, not performed. I mean, what do you want from this world? What does Harry Potter want now that he knows what Harry Potter is? Harry thought about it seriously because Dumbledore was asking seriously. I want to understand magic, he said. Properly, I'm good at it, I know that, but I don't fully know why I'm good at it. What happens when a Kryptonian nervous system processes magical energy, why the interactions produce what they produce. I want to know that. He looked at the cloud moving. I want to stop Voldemort. Not because of the prophecy. I know you know about a prophecy. I've felt the shape of it in how you talk around things. Not because of that. Because he's a man who is choosing every day to be what he is, and what he is destroys people. He paused. I want my friends to be okay. I want Neville to stop being afraid of his own wand. I want Ron to know he's not second best at anything that matters. I want Hermione to find the framework she's building and be delighted by it. He turned to look at Dumbledore directly. And I want you to stop managing me. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. I am accustomed, he said, to being the most capable person in a given situation. It is a habit of positioning that has served me well for a long time. I find it is not easily set aside. I know, Harry said. I'm not asking you to stop being what you are. I'm asking you to adjust one thing. Stop making plans that feature me as a piece being moved. If you want to use my capabilities, ask. I'll usually say yes because the things you're trying to do are the right things. He held Dumbledore's gaze, but ask. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. The old blue eyes behind the half-moon spectacles doing that thing they did. Assessment, yes, but also something more genuine than assessment. Seeing. Very well, Dumbledore said. I will ask. Then we'll work well together, Harry said. He stood and offered his hand. Dumbledore looked at it and then took it, and Harry pulled him to his feet with careful ease, and Dumbledore straightened his robes and looked at Harry with an expression that was not managed at all. That was simply what it was, and what it was something like awe and something like relief and something like the feeling of putting down a very heavy thing. Sherbet lemon, Dumbledore said, producing one from somewhere. Thank you, Harry said, and took it because it cost nothing and meant something. They walked back toward the castle in the morning sun. The train back to London left at 11. Harry sat with Ron and Hermione in their compartment, and the landscape unwound outside the window in long green sweeps, the highlands giving way to moorland and then to the softer geography of the south, the world going from wild to managed in increments that matched the increasing proximity of a city. Hermione had her notebook open. She'd been looking at it for 20 minutes without writing anything, which was unusual. Ask, Harry said. She looked up. You said you'd explain. I did, he said. Go ahead. She looked at the notebook. I've been thinking about the frameworks, she said. Everything I know about magic, about how it works, about what it is, operates on the assumption that the practitioner is human, or at least from Earth, which means the framework is built around certain constants: mental architecture, biological capacity, emotional processing. She looked up. Your biology is different. Yes, Harry said. So when you do magic, it's not using the same mechanism. Your cells store solar energy. That energy is what's channeling through your wand when you cast. Magic isn't pulling from your life force the way it does with other wizards. It's pulling from an essentially inexhaustible source. More or less, Harry said. The interaction is more complex than that. Magic has its own logic. It's not just energy. It has, he paused, finding the right word, it has intention woven into it. It's not purely physical. The Kryptonian solar energy provides the power, but the magic provides the structure. They're working together rather than one replacing the other. Hermione was writing fast. That's why your spells are sometimes differently colored or differently behaved. The energy source is different, so the output is slightly different. Yes, Harry said, and it's why certain magical limitations don't apply to me in the same way. The things that tire other wizards, the drain of casting, the limits of concentration, I hit them differently. Later, if at all. If at all, Hermione repeated. Right, she wrote this down. The physical capabilities, Kryptonian cells under a yellow star, Harry said. I've been absorbing solar energy since I was brought to Earth. 11 years, my cells are dense in ways that don't have a clean muggle physics explanation. Strength, speed, the sensory processing. Heat vision, which I don't use around people because you could hurt them, Hermione said. Because I could hurt them, Harry confirmed. Flight is the same principle. My body is operating at a different equilibrium than a human body. Ron, who had been listening throughout while eating a chocolate frog with the careful attention of someone following a lecture that is above his usual curriculum but below his usual interests, said, "The troll." "The troll," Harry confirmed, "and catching the quaffle in practice at 100 miles per hour," Ron said. "Yes. And the thing in the library where you read 4 books in an hour. Eidetic memory, Kryptonian trait." Ron nodded, processing. "So you're magic," he said, "and also sort of something else, something from out there." He gestured upward, vaguely stellar. "Yes," Harry said. "Right," Ron said. He looked at his chocolate frog. "Can I tell Fred and George?" "Absolutely not," Harry said. "Didn't think so," Ron said without any sign of genuine disappointment. He'd ask again in a year, Harry suspected, and they both knew it. Hermione closed the notebook slowly. She looked at Harry with the expression she wore when she'd resolved a problem to a temporary satisfaction and was beginning to identify the next layer. "The crystal," she said. "Your father, what else does it have?" "I don't know yet," Harry said. "I've heard one full message and accessed one projection sequence. There are 14 more crystals in the pod. I think each one has something different, more knowledge, more history, more of him." He said the last part quietly because it was still new, that particular rawness of discovering someone through the artifacts they left rather than through presence. Hermione looked at him with the directness she reserved for things that mattered. "When you go back to Wales," she said, "I'd like to come if you'd let me." Harry looked at her. "Yes," he said without pause. She looked slightly surprised that he'd agreed immediately. "You don't need to, I know," he said. "I want to," Ron said from behind his chocolate frog. "I'm also coming, just so that's established." "Obviously," Harry said. Ron produced a chocolate frog card and held it up. "Dumbledore," he said, "says here he was involved in the defeat of Grindelwald, likes chamber music and 10-pin bowling." He squinted at it. 10-pin bowling. "He offered me a sherbet lemon this morning on the Quidditch pitch," Harry said. Ron stared at him. "What were you doing on the Quidditch pitch with Dumbledore at?" "Having a conversation," Harry said. Ron looked at Hermione. Hermione looked at Ron. A wordless conference occurred between them that Harry had noticed developing over the year. The communication of people who have become close enough to share a language that has no words. "Was it one of those conversations," Ron said, "where you tell someone what's going to happen next and they have to just accept it?" "Essentially," Harry said. "Brilliant," Ron said and returned to his frog. Outside the window, England continued its gradual transition from wild to civilized, hedgerows and fields, and then the first motorway visible in the distance, and the train carried them south through the golden afternoon. King's Cross was chaos in the way that large stations are always chaos. Directional, purposeful, the chaos of 10,000 people who each know exactly where they're going and are all going there at once. The barrier between platforms 9 and 10 and the magical world on the other side opened, and poured the students out into it in a wave of trunks and owls, and the slightly dazed expressions of people readjusting to a world where staircases don't move. Harry came through last, which was habit. He let everyone else go first, took his time, and emerged into the Muggle station with Hedwig on his arm and his trunk floating an inch above the ground because he was carrying it with his left hand wrapped loosely around the handle and not paying enough attention to the physics of it. He put it down properly. The Dursleys were waiting. Vernon, red-faced and unhappy in the way of a man who had arranged his face into this expression several hours in advance and had been maintaining it with effort. Petunia, thin and watchful, her eyes going immediately to Hedwig and narrowing. Dudley behind them both, who had grown 2 inches over the school year and was looking at Harry with an expression Harry had not seen him wear before, something slightly cautious, like someone recalibrating a distance. "Boy," Vernon said. "Mr. Dursley," Harry said pleasantly, "good to see you, you look well." This was not true, but it cost nothing. Vernon's face did something complicated with the pleasantness. He had, over the course of the year, received 14 letters from Hogwarts, some official correspondence about curriculum and holiday arrangements, and 9 written by Harry himself. The letters from Harry had been brief and entirely civil, and somehow, Vernon had told Petunia in the voice of a man describing an inexplicable natural phenomenon, unsettling. "Though the school," Vernon started and then stopped. He tried again. "I trust there were no incidents." "Nothing that required involving you," Harry said. Vernon processed this. Behind him, the Weasley family were making their way across the platform in a red-haired wave of noise and affection. Mrs. Weasley caught Harry's eye and beamed at him with the full-face warmth of someone who had heard quite a lot about him and intended to express all related goodwill at once. Ron grabbed Harry's arm as he passed. "Right," he said. "Hedwig can find the burrow, she's done it already." "I know," Harry said. "I taught her the way in April." Ron looked briefly arrested by this information. "Of course you did," he said. Right. "I will," Harry said. Hermione appeared on his other side with her parents hovering nearby. a pair of sensible, slightly bewildered people who had spent the year receiving letters about their daughter's exceptional progress from a school they had not previously been aware existed. Hermione hugged Harry, the same brief, firm, meaningful hug she deployed at Christmas and in the hospital corridor calibrated to convey a specific thing and then conclude. "Don't do anything interesting without me," she said. "I'll do my best," Harry said. She pulled back and looked at him with narrowed eyes. "That's not a promise." "No," he agreed. She made a small sound of exasperation that was genuinely fond and went to her parents, who each shook Harry's hand with the slightly over-careful manner of people meeting someone their child has told them is unusual and who are trying to be polite about not staring. Harry turned back to the Dursleys. "Right," he said. "Shall we go?" The car ride was quiet in the specific way of the Dursley car. Vernon's determined silence, Petunia's window staring, Dudley occasionally shifting in the back seat beside Harry in the way of someone who wants to say something and can't locate the beginning of it. They were somewhere on the M4, the flat motorway sameness of English countryside going by at 70 miles per hour when Dudley said, "Were you actually in danger this year?" Harry looked at him. "Yes," he said briefly. "It worked out." Dudley looked at his own hands. "Mum said you'd be back," he said. "When you left, she said you'd be back. I thought—" He stopped. Started again with the slightly effortful honesty of someone who has practiced this sentence in private. "I thought maybe you wouldn't want to come back." Harry looked at the motorway. The cars around them, every car a family or a story or a journey in progress, all of them moving at the same approximate speed in the same approximate direction. "It's not permanent," Harry said. "I'll go back in September." "I know," Dudley said. "I mean good, that's good, you should go back." He paused. "Did you actually do magic, like, properly?" "Yes," Harry said. "Can you?" Dudley glanced at his parents' heads in the front seat and lowered his voice, which Harry found almost charming. "Can you show me something, just small?" Harry looked at Dudley. He thought about 10 years of a cupboard under the stairs. He thought about a boy who had been taught that the best way to be big was to make everything around you smaller. He thought about what people became when they grew up in the wrong architecture. He looked out his window. A red kite was riding a thermal above the motorway, wings spread, turning in lazy circles with the unconcerned expertise of something that has been doing this its entire life. He pointed at it, very slightly, a small motion of 2 fingers. The kite turned toward the car and flew level with the window for exactly 5 seconds, close enough that Dudley could see its eye, the fierce and unfrightened gold of it, the red of its wings catching the afternoon sun, and then peeled away and went back to its thermal and its lazy, unconcerned circles. Dudley stared at the window long after the bird was gone. "Small," Harry said. "Yeah," Dudley said, "small." They rode in silence for a while. At the front of the car, Vernon and Petunia exchanged a glance in the rearview mirror that Harry caught and didn't remark on. It was a married couple's glance, complicated, history compressed, the kind of communication that has evolved over years into shorthand too dense for outsiders. Whatever it said, Vernon's jaw relaxed by approximately 2 millimeters. Small progress. Harry noted it and kept it and didn't perform anything about it. 3 days into the summer, Harry went to Godric's Hollow. He went at night under a new moon when the sky was clear enough that he could navigate by stars. He flew south and east from Surrey, over the invisible mass of London glowing below, and then west through summer-dark countryside, finding it by the embedded coordinates in his Kryptonian memory the way he'd found Wales. He'd looked it up in a history of magic before leaving Hogwarts and in the Hogwarts library in the final days of term. Godric's Hollow Village History, the Potter House. The house was still there, partruined, preserved as a kind of monument by the magical community. He knew this. He'd been reading toward it all year, knowing something and being there were different things. He came down in the village square, which was small and quiet and smelled of summer and old stone, and the particular piece of a place that doesn't know it's significant. A war memorial stood in the center. He walked past it, and it showed its true face for a moment, the witch and wizard and child visible beneath the stone soldier and nurse, and then returned to its muggle face as he moved on. The church was at the far end of the village lane. Old stone surrounded by a yew-hedged churchyard that smelled of cut grass and something ancient underneath that had no clean name. He found the graves without difficulty. They were together, which was right. A single stone, their names side by side, the dates of birth and death beneath and below the dates. The last enemy that shall be destroyed is death. He stood in front of the stone and read it and thought about the stone in his pocket, the stone that wasn't in his pocket, the stone he'd handed to Dumbledore in a moonlit corridor. He thought about Voldemort's version of that sentence and what it meant when the last enemy became the only thing you could see, when defeating it became the shape of everything you did. He crouched in front of the stone, pressed his fingers to it the way he'd pressed his hands to the pod in Wales, looking for connection through contact, through the physical reality of a surface that had been here since 1981 and had accumulated in the way of old stones and old griefs the weight of what it marked, James Potter. He had very little of him, a face from the mirror, a shape in old descriptions, a presence felt second-hand through the people who'd known him. Looked just like you except the eyes. He felt like a gap where a person should be, Lily Potter. He had more of her in a way because Hagrid had her eyes and Dumbledore carried her name carefully, and Snape. He thought about Snape. The way the man's particular tension changed when Harry's mother's name entered any conversation. Snape had been in love with her once. Harry was nearly certain of this. Had been watching it resolve slowly all year through the layers of the man's controlled expression. He thought about what it meant to choose love in the face of something that could not love back. To walk into a room with a dark lord in it and stand between what you loved and what wanted to destroy it with nothing but your own choice, your own willingness. He thought about Lara. Steady hands on the pod's life support. A civilization ending around her, and she was building something rather than collapsing with it. 4 parents, all of them choosing something, all of them paying for it. He stood up. He looked at the stone for another moment and spoke to it, not aloud, not in English. In Kryptonian, which was Jor-El's language and Lara's, and not quite his except that it was completely his. It lived in him as fully as any other language he had. He said something that had no clean English translation but was in the territory of, I see you, I'm here, I know what you did and why, I'm going to be worth it. The churchyard was quiet. The yew trees moved slightly in a breeze that didn't quite reach the ground. He floated straight up from the grass, slow and deliberate, until he was above the yew hedge, above the church tower, above the village. He turned once, looking at Godric's Hollow from the air, the cluster of houses, the square, the lane, the church, the ring of hills around it in the summer dark, and he thought about how a place could be both the worst thing that ever happened to you and a home, how origin and catastrophe could share a location without canceling each other out. He turned his face up. The sky at this height and this darkness was everything, the Milky Way a full arch overhead, the summer constellations arranged with the indifference of ancient geometry, the planets tracking their slow paths without reference to anyone watching from below. He breathed the altitude in the clean dark and let the starlight do what starlight does, which is mostly travel. He found Rao. It was easier at this altitude, away from light pollution, the atmosphere thinner. The red dwarf in the direction of the constellation Corvus, 45 light-years and a dead world in its orbit, and something in Harry's cells that still remembered it without having been there, the biological inheritance of a sun that had fed his people for 10,000 years. He looked at it for a long time. He thought about what Jor-El had said, I do not know your limits, Kal-El. I am not sure you have them in the conventional sense. He thought about Dumbledore on the Quidditch pitch this morning, sitting on the grass, asking what Harry wanted. He thought about the stone and Quirrell's burned hands, and the cold voice saying love is something soft, and what it was like to stand in that underground chamber alone at 3 in the morning and feel Voldemort look at him and recalibrate. He thought about Ron and Hermione on the train, and Hagrid's hut and the burning recipe, and Neville's face when the feather went 6 inches, and the Sorting Hat saying those are my people back to him, as though it was the most obvious thing it had ever processed. He thought about all of it, the whole year, the full, improbable, extraordinary, grief-loaded, funny, dangerous, alive year, and he held it the way you hold things you want to keep from breaking, carefully, with full awareness that care is not the same as safety, but choosing it anyway. He was the last son of Krypton. He was a Gryffindor wizard. He was the boy who lived, which meant not that death had missed him but that life had claimed him twice, once at birth, once at a curse's deflection, twice over and with interest. He was something that didn't have a name in any language currently spoken on Earth, and he was starting to think that was fine. That you didn't need a pre-existing category to know what you were. That you could be the first instance of a thing and still be completely, specifically, totally yourself. He looked at the red star. He made a decision. Not dramatically, not with lightning or revelation or the feeling of a door swinging open. He made it the way he made most decisions, which was by identifying what was true and choosing the action most consistent with it. Quietly, in the dark, above a sleeping village, with the years' accumulated weight of knowing himself more completely than he had in September, and the years ahead of knowing himself more still. He decided that the world he'd been given, both of them, the ruined crystal one and this improbable green one, deserved someone who showed up for it fully. Not with half his power held back, not with one eye on the door, not managing his presence down to the size that would make everyone else comfortable. Fully, as what he was. Both things at once, all of it. Someone Lily Potter would recognize, someone Jor-El would recognize, someone he recognized. He took a breath of cold, high air and looked down at England spread below him, lit here and there with the scattered warmth of human habitation, alive and complicated and worth it, and then he dropped back toward it, not falling, choosing it, the distinction absolute, and the dark air rushed past him and the lights came up and the summer night opened to receive him. He landed in the churchyard as quietly as he'd left it, stood for a moment by his parents' stone. "Second year," he said. Out loud in English to the stone and the night and whatever listened. "All right." He walked out through the churchyard gate and into the quiet lane, and above him the stars burned on with their patient and indifferent intensity. And somewhere in the direction of Corvus, a red dwarf circled a dead orbit 45 light-years from where anyone who remembered it still stood. And Harry Potter, last son of Krypton, put his hands in his pockets and walked back to the square and went home.